Go. Welcome, everybody. I'm Ana Gomez, and it's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce our panelists and presenters. This is so exciting for me and for all of us to be here together. We have here 7 countries represented. All of us are clinicians that have dedicated many, many years of our lives to supporting children and adolescents through the use of EMDR therapy. So it's a great privilege for me to be among this wonderful group. Thank you so much for being here. This is a group that has worked digitally and has worked for about how long have we been together? For 8 weeks, probably 9 weeks?
3 months.
Yes.
Lifelong.
So we have worked together. We are the children's group, part of the Global Child EMDR Alliance. This is a group that was formed about 2.5 months ago in response to the uncertain times that COVID-19 has brought into our planet. So we decided to come together and work together to produce resources, webinars, and support for our children, our adolescents, their parents, and also the EMDR therapists that work with them. And this is a product of months of work. So our children's group is just absolutely amazing. We meet every week and we have fun together, but we also work very hard to support our kids, our youth around the globe. And here we are today to do a webinar for all our EMDR clinicians to support you in the work with multiple populations. So let me share my my desktop so we can get going. So the title of our webinar is Helping Children Cope with Ongoing Losses and Changes During COVID Times. Our panelists and Global Alliance group members will be addressing a specific population and the challenges of working with children that come from many different places and with various and multiple mental health issues. Here is our team. We have presenters from France, Germany, Israel, USA, Colombia, the UK, Ireland, and Turkey. So each of them will be sharing their experiences, their knowledge, and their wisdom. So let's start with our first presenter, Dr. Michel Silvestre. He's a clinical psychologist since 1978 and a family therapist who has been in private practice since 1999. He's an EMDR Europe accredited child and adolescent trainer and one of the founding members of the EMDR French Association and the former chair of the EMDR French Association. He's a graduate of the Mental Research Institute, Palo Alto, California, and a senior lecturer at the School of Psychology, University of Metz, France. He's a member of the European Family Therapy Association. Michel, we're very happy to have you, and we are excited to hear what you have for us today. So let's welcome our first panelist and presenter. I'm going to stop sharing, Michel, for you.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for this presentation. And I'm very glad and very pleased to be a member of this group. You know, I have a lot of enjoyment and excitement being with you. And what I want to look in this short presentation is to talk about losses and gains. You know, what do children, family, what did they lose, and what did they gain during these different stages of the COVID-19? And then, so we start by the losses. You know, we will see a lot of losses as every time in crisis. We have losses in terms of parent stability, and I will develop this later. We have losses in terms of parents' happiness, where the children feel that something is different with the parents. Losses with this feeling of being stuck at home. There is no way, I cannot go anywhere, I can't get out, I cannot see my friends. What I find very important also in the work I do with children is the losses of feeling of peace, peace and safety. All of a sudden, we'll see that things are not the same. Losses of financial securities, and that's something very important for the children, and they are very much aware of what's going on, and losses of family fun. What are the losses of parents' stabilities? Often what they will see is that the parents, dad and mom, when they have a dad and a mom, will have different behaviors that they usually have. In particular, what I find that dad is getting upset more often. Dad is yelling, dad could be screaming, dad could be frightening for the children. As some clients told me, dad is not cool anymore. He's not cool, and he gets very upset at mom, very angry at mother. Therefore, the children now, because of the confinement and this virus, were in fact looking at the parents and the family way to function. They were watching their parents every day now. With father, with big headaches, and something one of my patients told me, I'm surprised, dad is not shaving anymore. Dad is not showering, he's staying in his PJs all day long. And that's interesting when you look at that, because for the children, this means that something is being lost. It's not the same dad anymore. Same thing for mother. Mother is sad, she cries. And the amazing how all of the children I'm seeing, they're watching the parents. They're watching how they are interacting. And when mommy's crying, something is really wrong. She's pulling her hair out. She's screaming. She's stuck. She's not nice like she was before. You know, she gets angry at us. And one child told me that she's always telling us what to do. She's angry at dad. She's trying to control everything. They fight a lot. And that's was something always surprising for the children. Therefore, mom and dad are unable to keep the differences for themselves or to talk into the bedroom. They fight in public. For the children, there is a loss of autonomy, a loss of freedom to explore, the feeling of being stuck. And when you look at the developmental perspective, where children are there to explore, to ride a bicycle, to go out in town, to have a cup of coffee, to have a drink of coca, to do whatever with their friends, all of a sudden they're unable to experience that. And I found this image that for me is very much a good example. They are stuck into a bubble and they watch the world now from outside, from the screen. The question we had in terms of losing freedom and autonomy is, when will this be finished? What's going to happen in the future? One question I will bring during this presentation is that, is this going to last forever? Because now in some countries, like in particular in France, the deconfinement is finished. People are starting to go out and to go back to work and to school. But there is this notion in the back of their head, maybe this could happen again. Maybe this could come over the summer. Therefore, life is not so nice anymore. All of a sudden, this type of feeling of niceness, easiness, peacefulness is gone. What about my life in school with my friends? This was one of the major losses for children. The fact that they were unable to see their friends for basically, at least in France, they stay in confinement for basically 2 months and a half. And what about my freedom to explore? I live by the sea, and the major thing, the children would say, can you believe that I cannot go swim? I cannot go to the beach. I cannot go see my friend. What about my family and my grandparents? I was unable to see them, my uncle and my aunt. I was unable to spend some time with them. Oh, something is, okay, next thing is a loss of peace and safety. And basically, loss of security. When children feel that something is going to happen now, they're unable to be protected. And it looks like this tortoise with on a shell, but the shell is upside down. A lot of fear. A lot of fear of the virus, fear of dying. You know, what I've seen often is these children being confronted now with many images of people dying, people in a hospital with all type of tubes, people being put to sleep. And some child was very impressed by some images she saw on TV about the people putting in boxes on the open field in a big parking lot or beside a hospital in America. And they were saying, my God, what are these boxes? And realizing that people were in these boxes. Fear of the future. Future is not safe anymore. Fear of not knowing what's going to happen. Fear of going back to school. And in particular, going back to school and bringing the virus back home. Therefore, that's amazing for children now. School could be a place of danger because you could bring the virus back home. And this will increase the children's anxiety. Then there is another point to look at. Children are emotional sponges, and that we know that they're basically sucking and absorbing everything they feel from the family. And these sponges, they will say about adult emotion. How do they see mom and dad reacting? What do they feel? What do they say? Are they scared? Are they afraid? Are they crying? I'm amazed by all these sponges about news and images on TV. What did they see on TV? You know, every day when they open TV, there is a number saying, now we're up to 20, 21, 22, 28,000 deaths. And now, you know, when they look, if they look at the American news, they said now we're almost close to 100,000 deaths. Therefore, this will stay with them as death becomes part of life now. And this will increase their emotional vulnerability. There is something else also about safety. Safety is not taken now for granted. Safety is damaged. And in particular, what I found right here is that parents are facing money worries. That's one major problem we start to see. You know, all over the world, we start to see that this virus was an impact only on the medical dimension, but on financial stability dimension, people losing their jobs, people going on unemployment, company closing down, people they don't know if they are going to keep the house or not, or if they will be able to pay the mortgage or not. And could they bring the virus back at home if they go to work? You know, with parents now facing the notion, I need to go to work because I don't have money, but if I go to work, I can bring the virus back home. With a lot of, therefore, notion of losing control, I'm not in control anymore of the situation. What are the gains when you look at all that? Because, you know, you don't want to keep only on the negative side. The gains are different type of gains. Sorry, there is technical, yeah, that's it. The gains are different. The gains of being together. And that's one of the, I think something I will keep in my head from this virus is that in some ways, in a very crazy way, is forces family to be back together, to interact together. With the downside then that we know with families is that they could be great to provide security, safety, but the downside of being together for 2 months is that we have a level of domestic violence that increased in Europe. Resiliency, how to get stronger. New family rituals. Therefore, what are the things now that we gain and hopefully we'll be able to keep after this crisis? Playing together and having fun together. Being together, for me, it's an essential point because what I've learned through my practice all these years is that children will regulate themselves through a relationship with an adult. And by being together, they are regulating their emotion. They are learning how to put some words into what they feel. They are feeling more secure. And what's important is right here, talking and spending some more time together. And that's my wish, a very strong wish, that we don't forget that about this crisis, that we don't go back to live the way it was before, giving the priority only to work, the priority of buying, of accumulating goods, and forgetting the children. What I found in all the session I had, that children were saying, it's great, I can talk to my parents, I can play with them. And see, what we understand is that when a parent is together with a child, he helps the child to understand what's going on. He helps to mentalize. He helps the child to put some words into his worries, into his emotion. And the goal for that is to reduce anxiety for the child. He helps to digest traumatic impact of the crisis. The child can ask mom and dad, they can see the parents, how they react, and through the parents' reaction, he can regulate himself or herself. He helps to reframe the situation in something that's more positive. And the positive for me is essential in my practice, because often as psychologists, sometimes we look too much on the painful, the dark side of the story, what's painful, what's difficult. And we tend sometimes to forget to look at the positive. And what we learned, what was good about this crisis. There is a question I use now. I tell them, let's say in 5 years, in 10 years, what will be the good things you would like to remember of this crisis? What is this crisis? What did you learn from the crisis? To provide some hope. Hope for the planet, hope for the nature, hope for life. To heal together. And we know that when we're together, we heal faster. We are less vulnerable, and to pray together, regardless of the belief, the religious belief. It's not about a particular belief. It's the fact that praying together allows the family to heal together, to spend some time together. And the consequences of that is to develop individual and family resiliency. And what we know from the studies on the trauma, and then when you have resiliency, individual and family resiliency, you are less hurt by your trauma. How can I increase my resiliency? Increasing my resiliency will allow me to be able to go back to school. And school is exciting, but school is frightening now because I could get the virus. Therefore, it's basically how I protect myself and I protect the others. One amazing thing now is that asking children to wear masks. When I wear a mask, I protect myself, but I do that to protect the other. And what's amazing right here is that they will wear masks if they see their parents wearing masks. And the mask is not so much about myself. The mask is like I'm protecting the other. Therefore, the other is basically more important than me. I can get a lot of my resiliency by getting some help to become stronger in order to develop my inner strengths and to loosen up my fears in front of the virus. How can I do that? That's where EMDR is amazing for that. And I think we are now in a process where we need to develop some EMDR in group at school for children, where they can, by drawing, by sharing, they can put out the bad memories, the bad feelings, the bad emotion to develop positive resources. EMDR with my family. I don't think, for me, it's not the time to see parents alone, children alone, but to see the whole family, because resiliency in a group is a lot stronger than individual resiliency. And what's amazing about this crisis also is that it has forced us to do therapy on internet, online, and not only in the office. And I just go back to 2 or 3 months ago, before the crisis, nobody was talking about doing another EMDR online. And now basically it becomes part of a practice, to the point that some of my patients are requesting that I keep seeing them online rather than go back to see me in my office. What are the new family rituals or habits that we need to gain and we need to keep? Basically, organizing the day differently. What people have learned from this crisis is that they learn how to structure the day, to structure the space in terms of private space and group space. And what's interesting for families' human system, and when you do that, you reduce the level of violence and the level of anxiety. It's in terms of it's my space or it's our space. When is it my time? When is our time? And this tend to increase emotional regulation. We also the notion of ritual, how to ritualize the day. And ritualizing the day is basically something that sometimes parents forgot, is to give their children something to do for the family. And when the parents are asking the child to do something for the family, they are providing the child with the opportunity to take care not only of himself, but to take care of the family. And by taking care of the family, I will develop my resiliency and I will be less vulnerable to trauma. The consequences of that is help the child to stay within this window of tolerance. Therefore, is basically, the ritual is providing him like some type of boundary that regulates him or her. It will reduce anxiety and fear within the child. Another point we have, I don't know why you're going, that's it. The notion I find is that organizing and sorting out things. This is something that I think families will hopefully will remember, that when they organize themselves, they organize their room, they organize their day, they're organizing also their mind. They are cleaning their mind and clearing out their mind. And one family told me that it was amazing that when they were doing some house chore, like cleaning the bedroom, cleaning the kitchen, cleaning the closet, they were feeling more peaceful. Therefore, we can see how these family rituals are not only good for one person, but they are good for every family member. The new point, and very important point right here, is that how they developed a stronger awareness with social media. In particular, what I find families, what family have taught me, and I'm using a lot, is basically the notion of setting aside a basket for putting all the phone on the screen for the whole family. And in particular during dinner time. You know, in Europe, and particularly in France, like all over Europe, dinners as a family is very important. It's a time where you sit together, you try to talk together. And what families are doing now, and they say, okay, around 7 p.m., whatever, before dinner time, let's put all the phone in a basket in an entrance hall. And we don't answer the phone for an hour and a half, as a way to provide the family for some time to share, some time to be together, to eat without news and phone. And that's something that a lot of parents were telling me, is that they have realized how they have to detox from the news. They have to regulate not to watch TV all the time, as a way to protect the family from the news and to reduce the time spent on the screens. When you do that, you help, and the family is helping itself and the family members to reduce anxiety. Playing together. That's one side effect of this crisis. The numbers of puzzles, of games that people were buying and were doing as a way to be together. And when you play together, you can play together to create art, to create music. I'm sure you've seen all the videos like me, like I did, on the videos on YouTube or somewhere, amazing videos of families playing together, doing something together, drawings, exercising, cooking. You know, one day I asked a family to do a family puzzle, and I asked the parents to order on the web, they order a puzzle with something like 2,000 or 3,000 different pieces. And every day, the whole family was sitting down to do the puzzle. And they told me a few days ago that that's it, they have done the puzzle. And it's a family puzzle. Exercising, doing some sports, either, you know, when people were lucky to have a house, they could exercise outside. Cooking become fun, you know, to the point that at one point in a store in the village where I live, we could not buy any flour. There was no flour because you could see that every family, they were cooking pies, they were cooking cakes. And when you do that, what happens, you create attunement. You create attunement to reinforce the attachment, and the consequences of that, you reduce anxiety, individual and family anxiety. Humor. And here, I found that on the internet. You know, 2020 is a unique leap year. It has 29 days in February, 300 days in March, and 5 years in April. And, you know, it stopped in April, but we could say how people perceive May. Was May even longer? To the point now that with humor, people are starting to say, why? Do I want to go back to work? Do I want to go and run as before and going to the car and to the office? What they got a lot of laughing together. And what we know from research, when people laugh together in a human group, it creates what we call emotional synchronicity. meaning that everybody is starting to laugh together and to feel good together, to regulate themselves together, feeling together. And feeling something good, feeling something sad, sharing emotion, it's a part of activation of neuronal mirrors. And that also is a group regulation that's so strong to protect the children. Dancing together. And dancing together, there is a video I wanted to show you, I'm sure you saw that on email, on the internet, where you see basically the whole family starting to create a show, a dance. And they were even using costumes to dance together, different type of dance, therefore using the body to regulate themselves. Therefore, you see, there were a lot of losses, but it's always good to keep in mind that when we have a crisis, we have a post-traumatic growth. And this post-traumatic growth, in all these changes that families were obliged to experience in the time of confinement, and hopefully they will keep that for the future. And all this allows to regulate emotions. Therefore, in conclusion for me, I will stop with that, together as a family in this strange time for a better future. It's not a time for me to see people alone and to forget to use the family resiliency that's a basis to help individual resiliency. Okay, but thank you very much for your time. And then before I introduce the next speaker, I can take a few questions. And if I can get, if I can get the questions, they should be, are they with messages or? I'm trying to see if you write some questions, where they are. I don't see any questions. Anybody has questions?
Well, I just have to say, Michelle, that this is so important, laughing together, connection, companionship, right, for the family, and to work with the system, work systemically, joining together. So I'm very appreciative of all the ideas that you have for families to join together and for the healing of the planet, right?
Exactly. And you see, for me, that's one of the, I think something with whom I'm very comfortable, and I emphasize a lot, is that the healing is first a relation healing, a family healing, and then an individual healing. And for children, often, we have a tendency sometimes just to take the children and do something with them without taking into consideration the relationship between the child and the father, the child and the mom, and the siblings. I found how important it was to involve the siblings and to see what was they doing together, how did they play together, and something very basic, cooking. It's like amazing, making a pie, making a chocolate cake, chocolate mousse. And where the children are happy to do that for the family. This is very interesting.
I love the concept of relational healing. That's so powerful, don't you guys think? I mean, it's so powerful when you say relational healing, healing together.
And what's amazing when you look at all the studies on resiliency, we find out that if we activate family resiliencies, we go a lot further after that for individual resiliency. Because
I have a question. If there was a family where the parents were also traumatized, would you choose to work with the parents first, or would you work with the whole family together from the outset?
But by precaution, I will be careful first to see the parents, to find what will be the way to make them feel better at minimum. I will not try to heal everything, but just to heal in the everyday, where they can be more at peace in everyday life. And then after that, to increase that by seeing the parents and the children. But yeah, I think the parents are the key element for children. And we all know that the children are like sponges. Therefore, if mom and dad are unstable, it's impossible to stabilize a child, as long as especially when they live at home. And in this time, I'm sure we see a lot of PhD doing their dissertation on that. It's an amazing situation to have people together for 2 months in a house. And we never had the time to measure that before. Therefore, I start to see some researchers about the impact of the family relationship, the anxiety. And yes, ST, yeah. I don't hear you, Esti.
In my country, there are growing numbers of reports on family violence. And is this a case in your country as well? And could you say some words about it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's as we say often, family is the best way. We never created anything better to raise and to help children. At the same time, family is the most dangerous place in the world for children. Most of the violence is inside the family. Most of the trauma is inside of the family. Therefore, yes, we had a major increase, basically an increase by 30% in France of domestic violence, of violence against children. And this is where now we are going to have a lot of work, because the children are going to come out to the school and they're going to be dysregulated in school. And then we have a lot of work as clinicians now to help the children, to help the parents, to help the spouses. Absolutely. This is what was very difficult, is that we were not able to intervene because they didn't want for a professional to go at home or for the family to come out to consultation as a way to control the spread of the virus. But yes, absolutely, this is a major dilemma for families.
Yeah.
Best,
especially now. And I think that we need to take this into consideration as well, because sometimes school was the safest place for some of these children.
Yeah, exactly. It's very difficult for that. We have to keep in mind these two notions. It's the best place for children and it's the worst. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, therefore, should I introduce the next speaker now? Therefore, let me go to, now I would like to introduce you, oh, sorry. There we go. Where's my PowerPoint? God, where did it go? Excuse me. Okay, I would like to introduce you, Daniela, and I'm very pleased to introduce Daniela. Sorry, Daniela Lamberst. She's a diploma in the qualified, I don't know what this means, but it's a qualified social education worker and a psychotherapist from Germany. She's an EMDR Europe accredited EMDR therapist. She's a consultant and EMDR facilitator and board members in Germany, with EMDR in Germany. In her first profession, she was a nurse in ICU. She's an author and international speaker of the use of EMDR therapy with children and adolescents with medical issues. And Daniela is the author of Emma's Kleiner's Wunder. I think something was the Kleiner's, the beautiful small wonder thing, something like that.
Miracle. Small miracle.
About trauma and the use of EMDR. And she did a pilot study about EMDR-based group therapy with refugees preschool. Very interesting studies, by the way, that you did. Yeah. Okay, Daniela, it's up to you.
Thank you.
Let me stop this.
So, thank you very much. Anna will help me with this presentation because I got some technical problems, but Anna will help me. Thank you very much, Michelle, and I will go on with another aspect of these COVID times. It's about helping children to cope with ongoing losses and changes during COVID times, and I will stress the point of the somatic perspective. And that's very important for me. As you said, I was a nurse in my first profession, and when I became a psychotherapist, it was like a personal closure of a ring, and now I got the two perspectives together. A little overview. First, I like to talk a little bit about the body, then about our body experiences, and about the influence on the somatic conditions of children during the COVID times. And I like to introduce some helpful resources to you all. So our body is the base of all our life processes. It's like an instrument for contact, and it's a resonance body. This means everything positive or negative will leave an impression, and this will lead hopefully to an expression. Like you mentioned, the mirror neurons. For example, if I meet someone who is laughing or smiling at me, hopefully it will create the same reaction that I'd like to smile and start smiling, and my body will relax and I feel very good. But sometimes this is a no, one back. Anna, one slide, please return one slide. No, in the other way. The other way. The other way. No, 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 no. Yes. No. Go on. Stop. And one return. And sometimes the expression of which we get in our resonance body are suppressed due to different reasons. For example, that parents tell children behave well, don't move, don't show emotions, and this suppression leads to a kind of depression on a bodily way. So if you are told that you have, or taught that you have to close your mouth and your mouth is not allowed to speak, then your body will start to speak. And like Aristotle said, if the state of the soul changes, you change the condition and appearance of the body, and vice versa. I think one has to read this quote 2 or 3 times to understand it, but I think it's very wise words that it all works together, our soul and our body, and we have to keep both in mind. Our well-functioning body gives us a lot of possibilities and gives us secureness, strength, possibilities to act, and satisfaction, and power, and fun, and many more things you can imagine. And every client comes to you with their body, and this body has its own genetic information, its own abilities and restrictions, wounds or experiences and scars, vulnerabilities, and some of these things are visible and some are not, but maybe you will discover them during the therapeutic sessions. We can make body experiences via different ways, usually via our senses, the skin, the eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. And you can put these senses or these experiences in a category of being held, experiences via touch and contact, or you can make experiences via movement, and this means movement, external movement like jumping or dancing, having fun, or internal movements as well, when you feel your heartbeat or your breathing. So you feel, oh, there's a body, I have a body and there's something happening inside. And you can make body experiences in form of deprivation. And all these experiences can be positive or negative, because deprivation is always negative, but all the other things can be positive or negative. And stressful body experiences like injuries or shock or situations of massive bodily stress, for example, the fear to suffocate, must heal both physically and mentally. And when the doctors in the hospital say, everything's fine, now you can go home, that doesn't mean that really everything's fine. Maybe the body has healed outside, but inside there is still a lot to heal, and this takes time as well. If a child is sick and suffering due to a corona infection, a lot of these experiences I mentioned before are difficult to be enabled, because the loss of contact can be due to be infectious. The child is not allowed to touch its relatives or to touch somebody else, and the younger the child, there is a lot of confusion because it doesn't understand why I'm not allowed to touch all my relatives, my family, my friends, and why they are wearing this mask and these gloves. And yes, it's really confusing for a little child. And maybe there's a loss of possibility to move due to be too weak. When you have a fever over some days and you can't eat properly or drink properly, we are all feeling weak. And the younger the child and the higher the fever, it's really exhausting for this child. And so it can't move. Maybe you have to feed it, you have to give him something to drink, and the possibility to move, yes, it's lost. And maybe as a result, there can be a deprivation of the child. And even if the child is healthy during the corona times, there can be a loss of movement. The children have to stay at home in quarantine, and there's a loss of contact to the relatives and friends they can't meet. And maybe that's not an obvious deprivation, and it's maybe more hidden, possibly. And now I want to talk about some possible symptoms from a somatic perspective. Maybe you can see a changed behavior of the child. At home, there's more sitting or laying or less activity. Maybe there's an anxiety, general or specific, like taking temperature very often during the day, or checking the skin if there is something, or cleaning the table because there can be a virus. You can see a hyperactivity, and this can be visible during the meals at the table or during the homework. Aggression or autoaggressive behavior, e.g. nail biting, as an expression of a lot of tense inside, which is looking for a way to get out. There can be sleeping problems because of a hyperarousal, because of fear, tense, or nightmares, or it can be a symptom of a beginning depression as well. And there can be sleeping problems because of a changed day and night rhythm. A lot of the adolescents, they got their homework or their housework from the homework from the schools, but they start doing this homework in the afternoon, and they start having their breakfast at 1 p.m. And this changed day-night rhythm will lead to another problems. There are mood swings to see, and developmental halt or regression due to less stimulation. And this can lead to depression. Maybe the child is more tired, or you can see a carelessness or a scruffiness. And a psychotherapy in a body-oriented way shall be tailored to the current capabilities and state of health of the children. And stabilization, when you work with sick children or children who are just recovering from a COVID-19 infection, you have really check very carefully, are they able to start processing all their experiences, or it's just possible to stabilize them more. And psychotherapy can use multisensory ways. There are different paths to get in contact. And the aim with sick children is to improve the moment, just the moment. And a lot of improved moments will lead to a very big time of improvement. When you are at home, and Michelle talked about the possibilities which families have at home. And on a body or somatic perspective, there's a chance for creating new positive bodily sensations, which you can enforce with butterfly hugs or other ways of bilateral stimulation. I mentioned the back scratcher. This is such a thing, and even I show you, and even the child is still infectious. You can use these things to do the tapping as a form of bilateral stimulation. And the focus is of improving and healing and creating a positive future perspective. For example, tell the child, you can't do this now, but in some weeks you can do this again. And meanwhile, try this. You can give the child a little cotton ball that it can do the bilateral stimulation on its own, or just create positive body experience with a little small cotton ball. And when children or people are sick, they are always asked, where does it hurt? But I like to stress the point to inverse this and ask, where does it feel good versus where does it hurt? And healing touchings and movements, to ask the child, what feels good, which movement, which touch, and maybe you can experience something new. And when the bodily sickness is over, it can be, as I mentioned before, that it's not over for every part of the body, soul, and mind of the child. It's always good to provide options and not just only looking on the point or on the things which are not possible, but look on the things which are possible. For example, movement. Yes, you can't go out or you can't go to your sports or football or whatever, but what's possible at home? What can you start at home? Are there new sports you can try? Are there new exercises you can do? Or maybe you can make a little hide and seek in the house or around the house. So think about the family, the child, and everybody. What's possible for movement? What can we do? Or for contact. Sometimes during crisis, even if the family is together at home, sometimes they forget each other and they are living side by side and they don't notice the other persons of the family right now. And so it's necessary to get in contact, and to get in contact via bodily experiences as well. Maybe the child is sitting there doing his homework. You can put your hand on the shoulder and say, oh, it's good. Oh, you can do this very well. Or you tickle your child or do something, or do a little dance. So we all need this contact via the body, and we don't need so much words sometimes, and even the children don't need so many words, but they want to feel that there is contact and that there are people who love me and who are taking care of me. And very, very important is to take care for yourself at first, because you need the strength and you need to be healthy as well to take care for your children and for your family. And there is this little cup of tea, and this stands for a little pause every day. Make ritualized pauses, and even if they are only 2 minutes, but do them regularly. There are some helpful resources for healthy and for sick children. For example, a ball for kneading or Play-Doh at home. You can use it for bilateral stimulation. For example, that you say, imagine your dream holiday place, and then take this Play-Doh or this ball for kneading and put it from one hand to another very slowly, and imagine this place of this holiday island or whatever. The younger the child, the more you can use this basic stimulation stuff, for example, brushes or sponges or silk, and try and test what feels good and ask the child, what do you like? And maybe the child can do this with you again as well. And for to install some mindfulness, you can use these soap bubbles, and you train the child to do mindful breathing. And the exhaling is very important, because through this very prolonged exhaling, you can reduce the tense in your chest. There are tasks for parents to do with their children at home to reinforce comfortable body images. For example, a pizza massage or a weather massage. And I described this pizza massage a little bit for those who don't know it. The child is laying on his belly, and it's the pizza. And you are kneading the back of the child, because this is the pizza dough. And then you are doing this with your hands, and then you make this very smooth and ask the pizza, what do you want to have on your pizza? Maybe some olives or some sweet corn or some spinach and cheese and a lot of oregano. This means a lot of herbs. You do it much more slowly than I describe it now. And after that, you put your hands on the back of the child and say to the child, close your eyes, you are now a pizza and it's getting warm, and feel the hands, how warm it is. And then you feel probably a relaxation in the body of the child. And to improve the attachment, or to make a fun attachment experience, you can switch the positions, and then you will be the pizza and the child will be the one who is doing it. Mostly the children do it a little bit quicker than the parents are doing it, but it's relaxation as well. And you can do yoga or stretching, or you can use some of these apps you can find to do regular things to lose tense and to relax. A very simple way is a 1-minute meditation, as you see there. It's called Pixel Thoughts, and you can put it on your mobile phone and carry it with you, and you can do it as often as you like. There is no bad side effect of it. Practice mindfulness alone and together. And yes, this forest bathing, we all have gone very often to the woods, and then it was just a walk through the woods, but today it's called forest bathing, but I think it has the same effect. Go out for a walk and walk through the woods and see the green and smell the fresh air. It's relaxing. A poem I really like is from Karl Ludwig Schleich. This was a medical doctor, and he was the founder of the anesthesia, and I'm very grateful for this. And he said, taking care of the soul through the skin. And this is a way we really have to keep in mind. That's a very short way, and it's very direct, and yeah, it feels so good. Thank you very much for your attention. Are there any questions or remarks?
Yeah, I really like your presentation, Daniela. It was very interesting for me, very useful. And I was wondering, you say you were a former nurse in ICU. And is there anything what is the most important thing that you learn from being a nurse in ICU that as a psychologist you are using, that's helping you in your work with children now in this context of Corona?
Yes. One thing, never give up. The second thing, there is always a spot on the body where you can get in contact with a human being. When you visit patients on the ICU, they have a lot of stuff around them, and mostly the relatives are afraid to touch the patients on the ICU, but you can touch them and you can get in contact to them even when they are in a coma. When you think you can't reach them, there's always a way to get in contact and you can touch them. And that was very a very how do you say, it's very worth experience. And improving the moment is the thing I've learned, or that's the combination of being or having been a nurse and working as a psychotherapist. Improving the moment, that's it.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
I really enjoyed the use of the Play-Doh for bilateral stimuli. I'd never heard it, and I thought it was a really great idea for instilling the safe place. I just thought it was wonderful to think of your holiday, or think of whatever it was, and moving it very gently back, because you've also got the capacity to do, it's not quite Estes lemons, but it's still got that same capacity, hasn't it, for yeah, touch and so on. I also really enjoyed the piece that you said about what's possible for you to do when it came to the movement at home. And what came into my mind straight away was, I don't know whether you've seen it in Germany, but in England, this very elderly veteran walked on his driveway, and he's 100, and he's actually raised many millions, and he's the epitome of anything is possible, to do. So he in other words, he wasn't limited, and I just thought that was such a lovely thing, because it's very solution focused in looking at what can be done rather than what can't be done for the young people. So I really loved it, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you. And one remark, you can use these kneading balls, for example, for children, or for people, for children with diabetes or rheumatism who will get injections every day. When they're afraid of them and somebody has to give them these injections, they can do this kneading, this bilateral stimulation during they're doing this injection. And the SUD of some, I remind one patient, she was 16 and she has got multiple sclerosis, and she was so afraid of these injections, but during this kneading, her SUD, her subject unit of disturbance, fell from 9 to 2, because she could do something during the injections.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you. So, and I like to introduce Esti Basadeh. She's an EMDR Europe accredited child and adolescent trainer and certified child psychotherapist. She's an author and an international speaker on the use of EMDR therapy with children and adolescents which are at high risk. As a trauma specialist, she serves as a consultant for a number of teams in her country on the subject of war trauma, community violence, and complex trauma. She specializes in EMDR dyadic work with parents and children, and she has written several book chapters and articles on the use of EMDR therapy with children and adolescents, EMDR group intervention, and dyadic EMDR. Welcome, Esti.
Thank you, Daniela. And I really congratulate you on your wonderful speech, because it was a great introduction to what I'll be introducing now. As I would like to focus on one of my favorite group of, just a moment, I'm just looking for my presentation. Here it is. Okay. So let's go. And here we are. And today I would like to talk about two groups of children whom I really love to work with, the SPD and the ADHD. And these are the two groups of child clients which manifest a neurodevelopmental condition which mostly affects the ability to develop self-regulation because of their hypersensitivity to changes in the environment and to the emotional climate of the caregivers. Under the present stressful times, when these children may be reacting to the higher degree of stress in the environment and to day-to-day changes imposed on them and their family, we must look for means to help them. So let's look at the special neurological condition. Oh, sorry. These kids have been called SPD, or sensory processing disorder, which is a neurological disorder in which the sensory information that the individual perceives results in abnormal responses. It is like a neurological traffic jam that prevents certain parts of the brain from receiving the information needed to interpret sensory information correctly. This results in odd behaviors and wild mood swings. These children are living in a state of perpetual flight, fight, or freeze in reaction to stimuli, or in constant fear of those reactions' onset. These fears takes a toll on SPD children and their parents. The other group, which I would like to focus, is the ADHD, which have trouble with executive function, which may lead to chronic stress and anxiety. ADHD affects how kids manage their emotions. Kids with ADHD may get so flooded with emotion that they have trouble thinking clearly about how to cope with the situation. The result may be that they can be swept away by a single emotion. A momentary emotion can gobble up all of the space in the brain, just like a computer virus can devour a whole hard drive. Working memory impairments diminish the emotional energy needed to plan, monitor, or self-regulate. These leave children with ADHD disorganized, quick to anger. The way of the brains of these two groups processes information may be a bit different than the brains of children without these conditions. And the end result is that they are left with a sense of disability or no ability to cope with small or big stressors, and instead they act out or act in. Very often, this triggers the meltdowns, defiant or explosive behaviors. And very often, these behaviors are unclear to the surroundings, to the caregivers, or to the child himself. The sense of loneliness, helplessness, shame is there. So, as we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can look at all of the needs for physiological, safety, social, and self-actualization, which are built in an hierarchy. And let's look down at the bottom. You could see that the physiological needs for these kids, which are space, open air, a lot of movement, may be very restricted at this present moment and may be unmet at all. This may trigger the sensitivity to smell, touch, physical closeness, which might be too much or too little, as well as a sensitivity to the low overload of stimulation in the confined environment. Some of these kids may have sleep problems in their daily routine, and now it could be worsened. They are likely to be disturbed by worries about actually being sick or causing others to be sick by the virus. Their inability to screen the incoming cues of danger coming through the media, parents, will lead to the sense of loss of the protective shield which once were there before the corona time. Many changes occur in the surrounding, and closeness to other people may no longer be considered safe. We may expect more intrusive thoughts and repetitive behaviors as other modes of sensory motor tension release are no longer available. Safety for them lies in stability and continuity. The loss of daily routine, which they are so strongly relying on for their sense of safety, loss of the ability to know and predict what, why, when. Every day, massive changes occur. Not being able to go to school and then going to school, not being able to go outside and then going into the street, into the school, and the environment is all changed. But the most stressful loss may be in the relational aspect, what Maslow described as social. Parents' emotional availability and ability to contain harsh feelings and distress has narrowed. Co-regulation may be lost or hard to achieve, and this may cause the loss in the sense of feeling loved and connected, loss of the self-esteem and the sense of control. As they become more and more dependent on parents' ability for their regulation, parents themselves may feel less and less available or be available for them. And we need to remember that regulation always occurs in the context of relationship. As Vygotsky coined the term other regulation, we first are regulated by regulating other, and other regulate us as we react to them. And now co-regulation may no longer be easy to achieve. Our autonomic nervous system detects the signals of sensing safety and risk, listening moment by moment to what is happening in and around our bodies in the connection we have to other, and this connection may be now lost. The loss of the ability of the parents to contain may lead to the fact that as these kids display their day-to-day fight or withdrawal behavior, their parents are less and less able to co-regulate. And we may see what we call small T's, which may be obstacle in fulfilling the need to develop, grow, and be creative. This might lead to a fragile sense of the self, loss in the continuity and cohesiveness of the developing of the good enough sense of self and others. What we might in the EMDR world consider as the construction of the self-schema, which consolidates around negative cognitions, such as I am bad or the world is bad. Very often, they may feel stuck in feelings of anger, shame, helplessness, and defectiveness. So this may also be a risk factor as they need to step forward in the developmental ladder to fulfill the need for self-esteem, power, control, and then the ability to achieve fulfillment and maximize the potential for growth. So, how do we help them? For this, I would like you to look at Panscape's schema of the 7 inborn emotional circuits. Panscape states that every mammal, us included, has built-in emotional circuits or networks, a hardwire and ready to express affect. These circuits are accessed in accordance with what goes on inside or outside the child. Each of these circuits dictates behaviors. Seeking and motivation circuits and the social emotional circuits are interlinked. These are characterized, as you see, by care, soothing, contentment, play, approach behavior, curiosity. Other circuits are primed to deal behaviorally with fear, anger, and panic. So, first of all, we need, as clinicians, to teach parents about the different states that are related to different affective systems, so they can themselves can identify where they are at any given moment and where the child is during times of meltdowns, tantrums, or defiant behaviors. And before behavior escalates and afterwards, they need to activate the approach seeking affect circuit. So the main thing for us is to help them unbalance the equation. By this, Panscape suggests that clinician explicitly seeks to utilize the power of positive affective system of client's brain. For instance, the power of play, considering that play can promote the expression of various neurotrophins. It is to be expected that playful interaction may have antidepressant effects, and the resulting neuroplasticities may reinforce better and longer-lasting psychotherapeutic benefits. So, if we can say what resilience is, it is more positive affective circuits than negative that should be activated. And there is a research done on people who are resilient, and the idea is that they always report about 60% more positive experiences than negative in their life. As long as we unbalance the equation, good enough resilient development continues. And here is an exercise I do with parents and children, which will exemplify how we turn out these moments of breakdown into a playful activity. I ask them, let's imagine that you are crossing a bridge on a stormy water. We have to walk all the way on the shaky bridge, but at the end, you will reach a solid, stable, beautiful place. So let's start crossing it. And parents and the child are just starting to move together, trying to find the focal point and stabilize themselves in motion. So as we teach parents how to engage their children into the attachment-seeking motivation system, we help them to change affect states. There is always an opening for repair, reestablishment of connection. So we give them some exercises that they can utilize either during therapy hour or back at home. Let's go to our cooling down space instead of a safe place. And they could even build this special spot or space in their home. We could ask them to do some safe activity, and we would like them to cross their thumbs like this, then close their fists, put them down their neck, and hit from one side to the other as they try and catch the child's gaze. Another thing that we teach them is safety in the body. And this means that a lot of the tension is a muscle tension which needs to be released. And we encourage them to run around the house, to have a pillow fight, jump up and down, and let go of all the tension in the body, doing this together with the child. This activates the sensory motor area, the lower parts of the brain, so physical activity helps them to get reconnected and regulated together. Here are some more active ways to calm down. I will not go through all of them, but I will just mention some of them. Squeezing lemons, blowing up bubbles, imagining you're pacing in a puddle of mud and just rocking your feet in and out, chewing gum, stretching your body as if you're a cat, and imagining a mosquito on your face, which you have to drive away. All of these are fun muscle release exercises. Remember, different affect states need different calming strategies of regulation. And regulation always starts with breathing. And this is where the polyvagal theory teaches us that in order to feel safe in our bodies and in our environment, in our relationship, we need to affect the autonomic nervous system, which is our personal surveillance system, and start breathing together. Most of these children with developmental issues may be too overactivated by deep breathing technique. This may activate a disturbing stimuli, as it might open up the attention to stimuli that may be too disturbing for them. Often, the brains of these children regulate through action, calming down in action. So instead of taking a deep breath, teach them to imagine that they have a coin right up here at the edge of their nose. Ask them to inhale just until that point. And exhale. And then again. Inhale and exhale just up until this point. And the other thing I would ask them is to imagine a color which they love. And can they imagine that the air they're breathing is colored by this color? And then both parents and the child inhale up until here and exhale. So what is the focus of EMDR therapy with dysregulated children and parents? It is mainly around reconnecting and engaging. And to summarize what neurophysiology teaches us, it is most of all that playfulness lowers defenses by conveying safety and by encouraging connection. If we will go back to Penske's neuroaffective system, through advocating playfulness in the therapeutic process, We activate the affective circuits of seeking and care, which are directly related to attachment. Playfulness in the relationship, along with the loving touch, eye contact, lower defenses and lead to strengthening up the neuroception. This is Porges' concept. Within this neuroception of safety, processing of painful material can begin to take place. As we establish the ability to reconnect and engage in a bodily felt sense of safety, the treatment plan can be executed starting by processing present small t's, small traumas, as we focus on their recurrent small t relating to the present reality. A memory of meltdown, a memory of crying spell which couldn't be stopped, a memory of loss of control over anger, a memory of being triggered by a sensory stimuli or fear. And wherever there is a stuck point which needs interweaving, we must remember to interweave by asking parents to be active and take part in the process of co-regulation throughout the 8 phases of the protocol. I would like to finish by sharing with you something that a little girl which has SPD brought up as she processed. And she said, as I had trouble sleeping, what comes up for me now is Daddy, who is taking one of my hands in his palm and gently presses one palm, and then the other, and then one, and then the other. And we move our eyes back and forth to the other hand until I relax and fall asleep. So I would like to finish with a quote. Take me to the magic of the moment on a glory night where the children of tomorrow share their dreams in the wind of change. Thank you.
Esty, thank you. That was very, very powerful. And once again, you remind us of the power of connection. That was very touching. I think this is why we were silent, because I felt like I was reflecting upon what you gave us. And that was very deep and powerful. I'm very appreciative for everything you've given us and how you connected it to what we know from science, but also took it to the level of the relationship and the connection. So I'm grateful for what you gave us today.
Thank you.
Too, I thought it was really powerful. I loved the understanding given at the very outset about ADHD and the struggles that young people have with the change that happens. And of course, with the COVID-19, it's happened so suddenly and quickly. And they've had many, many changes all at once nearly to tolerate. But I particularly loved your piece around how parents need to be active as part of the process. Which is so important, as we know, and it's just nice to be reminded of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. So I would like to go on, and I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce our leader. And the lady who calls us to duty every week, and no one dares not to show up. And she's responsible for all of this creation. So thank you, Anna, for not letting us just say, no, we don't have the time, no, we don't have the strength. You're really, really, really an inspiration. So Anna will be the next presenter. Ana Gomez, MCLPC. She's an EMDR Institute, an EMDR IBA trainer of trainers. She's a psychotherapist, author, and an international speaker on the use of EMDR therapy with children and adolescents with complex and developmental trauma, as well as attachment wounds and dissociation, and is the author of EMDR therapy and adjunct approaches with children, complex trauma, attachment, and dissociation, and several books, book chapters, and articles on the use of EMDR therapy with children and adolescents.
Thanks, Esty. I will wait to share when you stop sharing.
Oh, say, okay.
Like, no.
Yeah. And now I also, yeah, okay.
Okay. So first and foremost, I would just want to thank this team, and just an incredible team of people that have dedicated so many years of their lives to healing, to supporting our most vulnerable children, adolescents, and their parents. I'm very inspired every single week by each of you, every week, by the work that you do, by the connection that we have. I think so far all the presenters have talked about connection, the power of connection. And I always remember it, probably every training I do, I always talk about what Gabor Mate says in terms of how safety is not just the absence of danger, but it's also connection. And I just have to say that this is a group that provides so much safety for me as a helper, because not only our clients struggle, we helpers around the world struggle as well. And so to have this amazing group that help us feel connected, to help us feel that we belong to a group of people that is dedicated to healing, is an incredible gift for me. And I hope all of you know that from the bottom of my heart. So here I am. I'm going to talk 15 minutes, 18 minutes, I hope, about a topic that probably will take a week to address. But I will try to give highlights of how to work during pandemic time and COVID-19 time with a population that is so complex and convoluted and difficult to work with. And this is a population I've dedicated a big portion of my life to work with. And why, I don't know. They just came to me. You know, they find us. I did not know anything about dissociation of complex trauma when I had my first case, but I'm grateful for the teachers, the masters of my life, the children and the adolescents that have crossed my life and have enlightened my mind and have showed me the meaning of, you know, pain for them, and have showed me some of the things that work for them and the things that don't. I have made so many mistakes across, you know, the many years I've been a psychotherapist, about 25, 26. And through the many mistakes as I walk through the trenches, working with clients every day, with clients that have suffered horrible experiences of trauma, and in the process, certainly I made a lot of mistakes, but I've learned from them. And from those mistakes, I'm here to give you some tips in terms of what can be done during this pandemic time. So children with complex trauma and dissociation, they come in with pervasive emotional dysregulation. And here it is. Okay, here it is. I'm not going to be able to go through every little piece of this, but I just want you to see the magnitude of what complex and developmental trauma are. This is a type of trauma that takes place during critical periods of development. So this is not a single traumatic event, but this is trauma that impacts not only memory, but impacts the integrative capacities of the child, impacts the affective system, and impacts their capacity to regulate states. These are children that endure chronic, repetitive trauma and a very sacred relationship, the parent-child relationship. So this is interpersonal trauma, is prolonged, is chronic, and it's cumulative trauma. So it has an impact in the neurobiological development of the child, and also it has a huge impact when it comes to the development of identity. So for many of these children, they didn't have from the environment what they needed to attain integration. So, and this is coming from Giovanni and Liotti, they were exposed to multiple and incongruent models of the self and the other. And as a result, they could not integrate all this multiple in incongruent models of the self and the other, and then dissociation becomes the primary mechanism of adaptation. But not only that, they're unable to integrate all this information. So now fragmentation becomes their path. Okay, so this is a multi-layer and multi-dimensional issue when it comes to complex trauma. And if we're going to work with complex trauma, most likely we're going to work with some level of dissociation. For many of these children, they already show signs of fragmentation, and they may meet criteria for diagnosis such as OSDD, other specified dissociative disorder, and for some DID. Many of these children actually have a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder. These are children, for some, that have been institutionalized and live in the foster care system, or they've been adopted, but these are children that have endured abandonment, significant neglect, abuse, and even though these are children that are highly vulnerable, it's amazing the strength that we find in the essence of these children, and the resilience that they also show. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all this, but since this is for EMDR clinicians, we have to look at the adaptive information processing model from Shapiro and looking at complex trauma to understand how these kids not only have memory systems that contain information about trauma and adversity and entrench cognitive, emotional, and somatic schemas, but they also lack the adaptive information. They have significant deficits, not only what happened to the was wounding, but what didn't happen, the things they didn't get. Usually because the trauma takes place within that parent-child relationship, these are children that were not seen. These are children that were neglected. These are children that develop a confused sense of self, okay? And these experiences of trauma remain frozen in time. So the AIP system, the adaptive information processing system, is inhibited by trauma. And what we see in their symptoms is how this entrenched cognitive, emotional, and somatic schemas are manifested. And we see anxiety, we see depression, we see dysregulated anger, we see impulse control. What is sad about this population is that quite often they get misdiagnosed, and rarely these children come to us with the actual diagnosis of a dissociative disorder. And in the DSM-5, we really that we lack the capacity in the DSM-5 to actually honor this phenomenon and to honor really what these children present. Okay. The other piece with children with complex trauma is, of course, they have to defend. They had in some way to survive. So they come in with entrenched defenses. And defenses could be, dissociation, avoidance, pleasing, control. And sometimes to be able to navigate through these defenses could be very challenging for the EMDR therapist. In addition to that, now we have the stressor of COVID-19. And it's not only stressing the child, it's stressing the school system, but it's stressing the caregiving system. It's stressing the parents. And so now co-regulation is broken, mutual regulation is broken, and this is going to activate these children even further and may activate the way they have organized themselves. So if they have an emergent personality structure that shows division, then stressors have the potential to activate these defenses, these entrenched defenses, and for some children, dissociative parts even further. This is kind of a little cartoon and how I kind of visualize the brain of some of these children. So we have a significant amount, a number of memory networks that contain information about trauma, and with it, very irrational and entrenched cognitive, emotional, and somatic schemas. But in addition to that, if you see the circles, then we have the deficits, see the absence of the adaptive information. And this is why when we go into processing too fast, too soon with this population, they don't have the memory networks that contain the adaptive information that they can link up to. Shapiro was clear about this when she said, we need the adaptive information. We need the memory networks that contain adaptive information, because during processing, what appears to happen is linkage. The linkage among memory networks, the memory network that contains the traumatic material is linking up to memory systems that contain adaptive information. So preparation phase and stabilization with this population is going to be more convoluted and more complex. Let me go to the next one. These are kids with pervasive emotion dysregulation, and what we see in this population is the two extremes. Some children are emotionally dysregulated. Higher parts of the brain fail to modulate the midbrain, and as a result, all the emotions are running free. This is the kid that feels too much. In the presence of a minor stimulus, these are children that get completely dysregulated and show extreme behaviors that go from 0 to 100. And they are not able to control and manage and modulate this emotional states. And there is an overexpression of these emotions. So these are children that show dysregulated anger, aggressiveness. They become physically violent towards themselves and others. And these are kids that may have a highly sensitized sympathetic system. So any minor stimulus can move these kids into fight-flight responses, or parts, dissociative parts that hold the fight-flight responses. And so once again, in the presence of a minor stimulus, they go right into a fight-flight response. So highly sensitized sympathetic system. This is important because we must be intentional when we work with these kids and when we provide EMDR treatment. Some of these kids need down-regulation strategies that can quiet down that highly sensitized sympathetic system. These are kids that are constantly neuroceptive danger. And even in the presence of safety, they're still in neurocept danger. So they live with that sense of danger and fear inside. And here we also have the kids that are shut down, emotionally constricted, numb. They overmodulate. So in the presence of any emotion, immediately they shut down, and they feeling is dangerous. So they have significant phobias, trauma-related phobias. So they have phobias of emotion. So I always talk about this little girl I had in my office. And I couldn't speak about feelings with her, because she would say, nope, we don't talk about that. So we had to call it the F word, feeling word, because she couldn't tolerate even the word feelings. Significant phobias, and that makes the work with these kids even more difficult. So they have the phobia of the memory, phobia of trauma, phobia of attachment, phobia of connection. So they have phobia of the very thing they need, which is the connection and the relationships. And they have phobia of the memory. So imagine for us EMDR therapists. So in EMDR, one of the most important goals is to be able to access the memory network and to stimulate the adaptive information processing so this memory can be assimilated, integrated, and moved to an adaptive resolution. These are words from Shapiro. However, these kids are phobic of the memory. So any attempt of going into this memory will be received with protest, with avoidance, or whatever entrenched defenses they already have. Okay. So let me go to the next one. There you go. So this is from a little book that should be available very soon. And it's a book for children with an internal self-organization in an emergent personality structure that already shows fragmentation. See, when you think about integration and fragmentation are two different roads that these children can take, hopefully, if we're able to identify these children early and we're able to provide the treatment that they need, then these children can shift into a different road and follow a path onto integration and mental health. This is what Leotti help us understand, the different roads towards dissociation. They all begin with disorganized attachment, and then depending on what happened to the child after that, then they can move into fragmentation or integration. Now, when things are difficult outside, things get difficult inside. And this is one of the things that we see with this population. So think about what's happening with COVID-19, the stress that is creating for the child and the stress that is creating for the caregivers, the people that take care of these children. And as a result of the stressors that they are experiencing, now the inner system and the self-organization and this emergent personality structures that show fragmentation become further activated. And now we have parts, dissociative parts starting to act out, okay? And parts now have conflict. So now we have outer conflicts and then we have inner conflicts. One of these kids told me a few months ago, she said that there was a part that was so scared of the coronavirus, but then there was another part that wanted to be friends with the coronavirus. So you have all these discrepancies that make their symptoms even more challenging and difficult. Okay. So these kids, as I said before, if we see fragmentation, now we have dissociative parts. There are incomplete disagreement. They have arguments. One part wants to do this and the other part, one part loves something and the other part hates them. And that's the challenge when we are stabilizing the system, because not only we have to work on stabilizing the outer system and looking at the whole family landscape, the relational landscape outside the child's mind, but also we have to look at the inner landscape and see how it's functioning. So when we do safe plays, for example, with this population, it's not enough just for the child to say, okay, I found a safe place and this is good, because it may be good for a part of the self, but then another part may be in complete conflict and another part may be highly activated, but the safe place that the other part chose. Now, we want to acknowledge and honor the inner system, but we don't want to get lost in that system or think that these parts are actually people, because they're not. Every single part, the way I see it, the parts are storytellers. Each part is telling a story about something the child has not been able to integrate, and to use structural dissociation terms is information that the child is not able to realize because it's too painful, because it's too dangerous to own it. And so the only road to be able to embrace life is to fragment. And so now we have all the storytellers. Some parts may hold entrenched in truncated responses. If fight-flight response was activated quite often and sensitized, there may be a part, dissociative part, that holds this fight-flight responses. Attachment cry for when the child was not able to get the needs met, the need for connection, protection, companionship, then, a part formed that contained this attachment cry, the need for connection. Okay, so what we are looking at with this population is a systemic work. I very much believe that when we work with kids, but especially with these children that were wounded in the parent-child relationship, the systemic work is fundamental. Is it easy? Absolutely not. But it's fundamental to do systemic work. These children are showing signs of fragmentation because the environment did not provide the experiences that the child needed to attain integration. Shevitz speaks about association and dissociation, two roads. See, a child that is receiving appropriate experiences of connection and safety and protection may follow a path towards integrating. So Steele and Vanderhart and others talk about how integration is a developmental achievement. We attain integration because of what the environment is giving us. So I want you to think for a minute about what these children had to endure since birth, for many of them, that they could not attain integration because the environment did not provide it. So now we need to stop the bleeding. We need to look at the environment and assess, create a baseline as we work with this client. If we've been working with them for a while after COVID-19, we need to reassess how well the system is meeting the needs of these children and work systemically with the caregiving system and the attachment system of the child. If we have a lot of experiences, there are integration inhibiting experiences, then we must work with these caregivers so they are able to attune, they are able to mentalize, they are able to hold the child's mind in mind, and as a result to respond contingently to the needs of this children. Okay. So integration is an ongoing process. So it's not just, okay, I'm done integrating, but it's an ongoing process. And as we go through the 8 phases of EMDR therapy, in many ways and in different ways, we are working on being able to provide to these children what they need to move towards a path that will move them towards integration. Okay, what's the environment giving to these children? What are the relationships given to this child? Many of these kids live in impoverished, relationally impoverished relationships and environments. So work with the environment, work with the caregiving system, so that way these children now receive what they didn't, corrective experiences, and in our relationship as well. The corrective experience of having a helper that is not rescuing, but is not abandoning. See, these are kids that endure abandonment. And now with COVID-19, separation from friends, losses, if they lost a family member, if someone got sick in the family, or they themselves had to go through the illness of and the result of having the virus, then those are things that can potentially activate these memory systems that contain, information about abandonment, loss, neglect, abuse. So when we work with the caregiving system, we have to also create a baseline to see this, I call them relational choreography. So entrenched patterns of relating. And looking at what's happening between the parent and the child to see how we can influence and support the caregiver, so caregiver now is able to co-regulate, is able to mentalize, is able to hold the child's mind in mind, and as a result respond contingently to the needs of the child, which is exactly what the child didn't get. Is that easy? Absolutely not. And this is why having a team, it is important. This is when you have families, sometimes it's the whole family that has complex trauma and dissociation. It's too heavy and too difficult for just one clinician to do all the heavy work. So once we identify and create a baseline of these entrenched ways of relating, then we can create within the 8 phases a treatment plan that can support the parent in changing these moments where they mutually activate trauma that has not healed yet. Okay, I forgot that I had this little thing. Okay. So let's talk about safety, because it's one of the first layers that we need to address in preparation phase and throughout the 8 phases of EMDR therapy. When the environment is not safe, then that in itself is going to maintain defenses up and going. Safety is going to help the child modulate internal states, whether they are emotional or somatic, but it's also going to help defenses quiet down. As long as there's things that are unsafe in the environment, then defenses will stay strong and will make the work that we need to do more difficult. But let's jump into the meaning of safety, because once again, safety is not just the absence of danger. Well, that's one element. So we're looking at, let's say, external safety. Are there things in the environment that in some way create that sense of danger? And the truth of the matter is that having a virus that has such power is a scary thing and can bring defenses up, right? Is there anything else that create a sense of danger, that takes away the sense of safety for the child? And is there anything that we can do to work around it? In the family, are there things that we need to, let's say, create a safety plan to restore a good enough level of safety? On the other hand, you may have a child that lives in an environment that may be safe, but internally, they are still neurocepting danger. So they live in a constant state of danger. That's where we're going to work on providing resources for those children to be able to modulate and regulate internal states, and for the parent to be able to co-regulate and be that external psychobiological regulator. These are words from Alan Short. To be that external psychobiological regulator of the child, so can regulate this entrenched state. The relational safety. Does the child feel safe in the relationship with the caregiver? Do we have a caregiver that is unpredictable? Do we have a caregiver that is highly preoccupied, anxious? And now the child feels the anxiety of the mother or the father. And now the fear continues to be procedurally stored in the mind of the child. Because there's no other choice. For instance, for a baby that is with a caregiver that is highly preoccupied and anxious, there's no escape from mother, there's no escape from father. So I must share this emotional and somatic states that now become part of the mind of the child, but is stored procedurally. So there is not a cognitive element or understanding of what's happening, but is embedded in the nervous system and the mind of this child. Emotional safety. Does the child feel safe in terms of, his or her emotions? Parents quite often have great difficulty tolerating the emotions of these children. And what they receive constantly is this feedback from the environment that says, your emotions are not good, there is something wrong with you. And this is where shame is born. Shame is a centerpiece, a core element and aspect of complex trauma. And we're not talking about just the shame of feeling that I did something wrong, but then come back to balance, knowing that I made a mistake, but I'm not a mistake. No, these are children that have what we call traumatic shame. It's the sense of defectiveness, the sense that I'm not good enough. And this shame has developed throughout the trauma, but also this dysregulated interactions with a caregiver that may be chronically misattuned, that never gets the child. As a result, the responses of the child never get to actually provide the regulation that these children need. Okay, so I love this in terms of how safety is also the relationship with the parent, and to be able to get these children out of survival, because if they're in survival mode, defenses go up, they're in a state of self-preservation, which means that their symptoms exacerbate, and we will see even more either dysregulation, constriction, and shutdown of their systems. We also need to get the parents out of survival, because a lot of these parents not only carry trauma themselves that has not been healed yet, but these are parents that, if they have adopted a child with significant trauma, with significant dissociation, sometimes parenting these children become a source of trauma and adversity. So parenting became a source of trauma, which is very, very challenging for these parents. And then the child continues to activate, they mutually activate memory networks they haven't healed and integrate it, right? So how can we get this dyad, the parent and the child, out of survival, out of self-preservation, into safety, co-regulation, and growth, And that's where I emphasize the work that is needed in terms of core regulation and work in the systemic work. So with parents, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but we must help these parents be able to mentalize. Research has showed us consistently that people with unresolved trauma have greater difficulty mentalizing. So they have a hard time holding the child's mind in mind. So instead of responding to the child, they react to the child. And quite often, they are chronically misattuned. Chronic misattunement has been called the invisible trauma by Leonce Ruth and Alan Shore, those hidden traumas that continue to happen. So we must work. We must do mentalization work. So even during phase 1, we need to ask questions to understand the parent's capacities. For instance, I ask questions, for example, so if the parent is describing a moment of conflict between child and parent, then I invite them to notice, can we slow it down a little bit and notice what's happening for you? I'm interested in studying and understanding the cognitive, emotional, and somatic patterns of the parent and what the child awakens in this caregiver. Because it's like, I use an analogy of the sun, our capacity to love, connect, co-regulate, and the clouds. So now clouds are memory networks that contain information about trauma. So now the clouds come in, and now the parent sees the child through the lenses of their traumatic event. And these are words from Shapiro. We see the present through the lenses of the past. Now the parent sees the child and attaches meaning to that experience that is highly influenced by their memories of trauma. And so if the meaning is inaccurate, if the meaning is negatively skewed, then the behavior It's not going to be a behavior that will meet the child's needs. Okay, so mentalization work, asking the parent, let's notice what happens for you. What are some of the thoughts that go through you? What are some of the emotions as you think about your child throwing a huge temper tantrum? How does your body communicate that? Can we sit with that a little bit longer? And then looking at holding the child's mind in mind. Can we take a minute? Invitations. I do a lot of invitations. Mom, may I invite you for a minute to just notice, what do you think your child may be feeling? What do you think your child needs in that moment? What is the need, right? And through those questions and repetitive questions, we start to open up a space in the parent's mind to hold the child. Okay. I'm not going to go through this in depth, but I have worked for years with a child with complex developmental trauma and the parent that also has developmental and complex trauma. And now we have not only a dissociative child, we have dissociative families. Now, what we know from attachment theory is that to promote security in the attachment relationship, parent must be that bigger, older, wiser person. But most of these parents, they don't parent from the adult self. In fact, they parent from that wounded little self. And so now when they parent from the wounded self, of course, these interactions with the child are highly colored by their traumas and mutual activation. So we have to help the parent notice, when I'm in my older, bigger self, see the self that is able to be in charge, that is able to handle things. Sometimes they are not able to even identify an adult self, but we go with the self that has the greatest capacities. We work with capacities and build that caregiving system to be able to provide for the child that sense of safety, protection, and contingency. Okay. And the other piece that they will not learn right away is kindness. Quite often for these families and children, there is significant shame and self-hatred. We do know the self-criticism actually activates trauma responses, fight-flight responses. So this is going to be a titrated process. And one of the things that I want you to remember from this, two special words, titration and intention. This is a population that even positive emotions might enter the system in a titrated manner. I want you to think about when we've been in the darkness, if we're pushed into the light too fast, too soon, we can be blind. So even positive emotions, they cannot tolerate negative affective states, but they're not able to tolerate positive either. Positive emotions sometimes activate negative emotions. I had this little boy that when we were working with the safe place and he experienced some calmness, then jumped and said, I don't like this. And so we explored that. I said, may I invite you to just look and see what happened in this moment? And he said, well, it scares me if I feel good. Because so for this kid's hypervigilance, help them feel safe. So if I'm vigilant, if I'm anxious, I'll make sure that I'm safe and that I'm scanning for danger. If I calm down, that means I may be in danger because I'm not checking the environment and screening the environment for danger. So this is something that must enter, in a very titrated manner. Even kindness. See, when we teach kindness, we start with very little bit of kindness. You have to remember, in children that show fragmentation in their emerging personality, parts hate each other. One part hates the other part. And so to have kindness is quite difficult. So one of the things I do is that I get Play-Doh, we mix them together, we talk about compassion and kindness. So if we mix love with kindness, then guess what we have? Compassion. And we may start with just a drop of compassion. So I save all the battles, and so I can take little drops. I put water, and then I say, okay, if this is all kindness and compassion, we don't have to feel the whole thing. So let's start with a little drop. And I put just a little drop of water, and then we go, okay, so we're going to feel just a little bit of compassion. We have moments of compassion throughout sessions. So I get my trumpet. Most of you, many of you know it. So I go, do, 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 moment of compassion. So we have little tiny bit of compassion. See, titration, titration, titration. Okay. And building capacities is going to be fundamental for these children. Depending on where we are, certainly we can process memories of trauma. However, in my experience of working with hundreds of kids, this is again something that has to be titrated. And we're going to look into multiple portals to access the memory network. So if you imagine the memory network, once this child has attained good enough level of stability and we feel like we're ready to go into memory processing, even that needs to be a titrated process. And so we must have multiple ways of accessing the memory network. So if you imagine the memory network that contains traumatic material, we're going to have multiple access roads. For instance, pendulation may be. If you imagine a swimming pool that represents a traumatic event, and you have a fearful child is afraid of swimming, we're not going to throw the kid in the pool all at once. It can further traumatize these children. But we may pendulate. We go into the memory network and then come back out. We'll go into the memory network, come back out. We may have to break down the memory into smaller little kernels and small little fragments of memory processing. Very much we can do. But again, titration is the key. So here, building capacities. State change. We're going to help these children increase their capacity to change state, to move from a negative into a positive emotional state. But even more important than that, we're going to help these children build affect tolerance. And it's the opposite of state change. I think early on, in the EMDR community, there was an over-focus on state change. So working on state change, moving out of negative states. But see, state change doesn't build affect tolerance. Affect tolerance is about being with, embracing what hurt, embracing the pain. Ultimately, when we healing, it's about embracing what's broken in all of us. Healing requires, as Tara Brach says, the radical acceptance of the pain, the radical acceptance of what's broken. So here we're building capacity so these children are able eventually to embrace the brokenness, that was broken in them, the pain, the hurt, the shame, which is so challenging. And visiting feelings has been my gig for a while. So I've written some books for children on that. Visit a feeling, sit with it. Once again, titration is the key. Measuring spoons, I've talked about this for many years. Measuring spoons, get your measuring spoons out of the kitchen. They're great for EMDR therapy. How much of this feeling can you sit with? Maybe a little spoon, maybe a little drop of the sadness, maybe a little drop of the shame, just one little bit at a time. And the other piece is companionship, okay? All our presenters today spoke about the power of togetherness and the power of connection. These children are wounded in relationship, and the healing happens in relationship with the helper, a relationship with caregivers, and the corrective experiences that this relationship can provide. Bounded Dog says something just deep and profound. I don't have it here, I should have. But she says that trauma is the event, but not only the event, but the aloneness with it. See, now as we embrace healing, we're going to embrace it in companionship. So quite often I'm going to be saying, I'm here with you. Or if the parent is present, we're right here with you. Yes, it's true, I can't take the sadness. But see, they can experience the sadness in companionship with helpers, with caregivers, right? And that is a layer of protection and a significant contributor to their healing process, okay? Here are some state change protocols for elements from Ilan Shapiro and Brewitt Lau. The 4 elements is a great way of grounding these children. With these kids, what is challenging quite often is, for instance, 1, they don't have a safe place because they don't have the memory networks that contain information about safety. So even if they find a safe place, the safe place may be quite distorted. Like, for instance, a child that said to me, my safe place is going down a roller coaster. So they don't know what it is to feel safe for many of these kids. So when we talk about safety, that's foreign to them. And these are protocols, for instance, safe place, that could become contaminated quite often and quickly. We ask for a safe place. We initiate bilateral stimulation, even though it's slow and short, they still get very quickly activated and link up to memory networks that contain information about trauma. Now, the 4 elements is about connecting first to the earth. So it's a grounding exercise, then looking around and finding 3 objects that remind me that here and now, I am safe. These children, and this is coming from structural dissociation, they live in trauma time. And their parts, the dissociative parts, live in trauma time. Because of that, they're not grounded in the here and now, in the present, right now, right here. Nothing bad is happening. And the environment around me is safe. So let's find 3 objects that can help you remember you're safe. Okay, so the 4 elements go through breathing. Many of you have talked about breathing. Then they go into water and connecting with water, whether it's drinking water or creating water. I tend to say water because some kids don't like when I talk about saliva. So making water. And then we go into fire, thinking about a memory that makes us happy, or maybe a season or a color that makes us happy. Breathing, I do a lot of the color breathing. Let's find a color that makes us feel good and breathe in pink. And we feel pink. We're going to paint inside with the pink color and we feel the pink. Singing, humming, and dancing. We know from Steve Porges that these are activities that are waking the ventrovagal system. This is the system that allows us to connect. This is the system that moves us out of self-preservation and survival into connection and self-regulation. So, singing, humming, dancing. And on the other hand, just like Daniela said, we must work with the body. For a lot of these kids, they experience trauma so early in their lives, so they have embodied states of trauma. And so we must work with the body. One of the things I love about EMDR therapy is that EMDR therapy works with cognitive, emotional, and somatic levels of information processing. So we're working with the body. If I know here that I'm good enough, but it hasn't translated to bodily state, then full integration hasn't taken place. So we must embrace the body. We must help the child move, dance, sing, right? As we are now creating the environment, so new synaptic connections are created and new memory networks that now contain adaptive material and positive material and adaptive information. And of course, as I said before, restoring core regulation, fundamental to restore the sense of safety. And I have to say, I haven't, I'm not looking at the time, so I may be way past, but I'm going to be done in a few minutes. Needs. Needs are fundamental. And for this population, they're foreign to them. They become needless or very needy. See, we see the two extremes. So we must help them develop a more adaptive and healthy relationship with their own needs. What are the needs that I carry within me? See, with this population, we're going to do a lot of visits inside. Can we pick inside and see what's happening? If you're asking about needs, multiple parts may have different needs. If we're doing a safe place, multiple parts may have different views of the same safe place. So we can check inside. I usually use language like a side of you, a color of you, a way of being you, that honors the inner system, but also conveys that you're one. See, we don't want to get lost in the system believing that there are actually different selves. See, this is information a child has not realized and maintains compartmentalized because it's too dangerous to integrate. Child couldn't integrate that. So what is it that the child needs? And helping the parent be able to pay attention to the needs, not just the emotions, but the needs, of these children. Okay? And one of the things that if you work, and of course, if you have expertise when it comes to working with dissociation, fragmentation, is that we acknowledge the inner system, but we don't get lost in that system, right? We help them have agreements. One of the things that, this is part of the book that I will have ready soon, is that they create boxes with the deal with this later for sure box. I love that box. And my kiddos really love the box. Now with the coronavirus, right? As we go through this, are there things that we can put in a box of deal with this later for sure box? Because not only we're working with the external environment of the child, but we're working with the inner system of the child, and we're starting to help the system be able to communicate and to increase co-consciousness. So communication among parts, dissociative parts. And we do it once again in a way that is titrated. See, co-consciousness must be titrated as well. We don't want parts to start sharing, for instance, traumatic material, but we want them to be able to start communicating and to make even small agreements. Okay? Okay, there you go. So I know that this is a very complex population to work with, but I hope I was able to provide even small ideas for you in terms of how to work during coronavirus times with such incredible population, incredible kids that have gone through horrendous trauma, but they're also incredibly strong and resilient. So thank you all. I don't know if you have any questions.
Oh, yes, I have a remark. Thank you, Anna, for this wonderful presentation. And I really like the concept of to see the parts as storytellers. So there's no judgment, and one can invite the child to create some curiosity. And in the real life, you don't tell all the stories at the same time. So I really like this.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Yes, it's about everything really has to be titrated. Each part has a story, holds a story for the child. Is information child has not been able to integrate, assimilate, and remains fragmented and compartmentalized, right? As a way of protecting the child from pain, but also is, some people call it a failure of integration, but what I see is that the environment failed to provide for these children what they needed to attain integration, right? Yeah.
Thank you, very good. It was very, very nice and very, very helpful. I just would like to ask you, because it's a very rich presentation you made. Therefore, if you want some people to walk away with, what would you like? Is there a particular key point you would like people to keep that you learn from in this time of COVID-19 that could help the children?
Yeah, but there are more things, Michelle, for that question. There are multiple things, but I want to walk away with the word intention. Being intentional in what we do. So EMDR therapy, initially, remember when I was trained in EMDR therapy, seemed quite technical. And after 20 years of doing EMDR therapy, I feel like I do get now the essence of it. And that is beyond technicalities, right? But for that, we must be intentional as well. Be able to resonate and synchronize with the other human being that I have in front of me. And to be able to organize the 8 phases in a way that truly honors the unique qualities, capacities, and lack of the client that I have in front of me. So I want you to walk away with the word titration, with the word synchrony, with the word intention, because if we use EMDR therapy with this population like a cookie cutter form of treatment, we miss the boat here, right? So I think if any, that piece. And the other piece will be honor the system of these children, but don't get lost thinking that they actually have people inside, because I've seen clinicians interacting like, oh, Josie, how are you? Like it's another person, right? We have to remember these are parts that hold information about the child that the child has not been able to realize and integrate, and as a result, remain fragmented. Well, thank you so much. I think I'm going to go with our next great presenters. Let me see how I can move this. Okay. So our first presenter is a great friend, a sister. I think we all have become family, and this is what I love about this group. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Susan Darker-Smith. She's an EMDR Europe accredited child and adolescent trainer and cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. She's a founding trustee of the Trauma Response Network, UK, and Child Humanitarian Intervention Learning and Development, a nonprofit organization dedicated to EMDR research. Susan is an international speaker on the subject of complex trauma and attachment wounding in children and adolescents. She holds a master's degree in human rights law and specializes in children who have been groomed and sexually exploited. And aside from that, she believes in unicorns. And so she's a loving, beautiful person, an incredible clinician that has dedicated a lifetime to healing children. And our next presenter also is Linda McGuire, or in Irish, it will be Linda McGuire. I hope I did it well. Linda is an EMDR clinician and certified EMDR child specialist and an accredited adult and child psychotherapist and clinical supervisor for more than 20 years. She has led university degree programs in counseling and psychotherapy, addiction counseling, and art psychotherapy throughout Ireland. She has a number of published therapeutic stories that teach and empower children. Linda is an active committee member of EMDR Leinster, and I hope I pronounced it well, in Ireland. In addition to that, it's another incredible presenter. I had the privilege of having her here in Phoenix and play together and have fun. So now I'm going to leave you with 2 very knowledgeable, wise presenters, but also beautiful human beings.
And how do we follow that, Anna? So what we want to talk about is the share screen working?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yes.
So what my learned colleague Linda and I want to share with you is how we help children adjust and cope with ongoing issues and losses. But we specifically wanted to talk about invisible grief during pandemic times, how we locate invisible grief versus visible grief, and how we support children in acknowledging what the target is that we need to be working on.
So one of the things we were looking at is the fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has led to many changes in our world, and obviously in turn many changes for children. During the formative years, up to 8 years, children look to their parents and caregivers, and primary caregivers, for cues about how to respond to certain situations in life. I think that might be said now for children over the formative years as well at the moment. And what we are seeing and noticing at the moment is that during these very unprecedented times in our world, many parents and caregivers are struggling. They feel overwhelmed. They're having to take on additional roles, such as teacher, something that they didn't think that they were going to be doing, whilst trying in many cases to work from home. So they're juggling many, many balls in the air and trying their best from what we can gather. So what do we mean by visible grief and loss?
What we wanted to look at was the loss of school teachers and peers. A lot of the children that we've been talking to are talking about how they're missing their teachers, how they're missing seeing their peers on a daily basis, how it's not just the academic side, but the normality of school that they miss. And this is what we would think of as a visible loss.
Another one that's quite visible is sports or extracurricular activities such as dance and singing. In many cases, children have had more than 2 or 3 afternoons in the week to do they're practicing, and then they either have shows or matches at the weekend. So it's a huge loss, and they can't really do those from home. So that's very definitely, we put it down as one of our visible ones.
Social outings. Cinema is off bounds. We're forced to stay at home with our popcorn instead of going out. So the things that we would normally take for granted, being able to play ball. When I take my dog walking, one of the challenges that I have is if I let him off the leash and he goes running over to another family, how do I extricate him back without having any contact? And how, as a parent, do we explain to our children that if we're out and they see other children, they cannot approach those children?
Friends and peers, it's a really difficult one for the children that we've been speaking with. Friends in school, but also, and equally, one of the big difficulties is friends in their local housing area or even their apartment complex. They may see, little Johnny or Jane out on the green, and they're unable to go and play. So they have to keep that distance. Maybe that will be changing in the not too far future, but for the last 11 weeks or so, that has very much been the case. And it's one thing to be able to use Skype and Zoom and so on and so forth, but for younger children, it's just so wonderful to be able to connect with their peers more often.
Financial. Some of the children that we've spoken to have experienced financial hardship. Their parents may have been contractors, and of course, in one case, the parent actually worked for aviation, airport services. And as he said, nobody's going to be building planes at the moment. If they're on a contract, their contracts have ended. So therefore, families who normally enjoyed a more affluent socioeconomic status are suddenly experiencing challenges in terms of their financial disposable income.
Holidays and family outings. That's a big one, really, because, given the fact that at the moment so many people have become really unwell and in fact have died as a result of COVID-19, it's exceptionally difficult to talk about, in a way, the fact that, oh, actually this week we should have been able to go on our holidays. Or, the fact that we like to go to the beach and we've had beautiful weather, which has been so lovely in many ways over the last number of weeks. But of course, the outings are quite limited. And when people do go out, there are controls there. So a lot of the children and the young people have been really missing these things. So it's one of our other visible losses at the moment.
Connection to other family members. One of the most heartbreaking things, I think, for a lot of children is not being able to see attachment figures, not being able to hug or emotionally connect to those they have a strong bond to, having to wave at grandparents through a window and not being able to run to them to hug them. And that's a very real, visible loss for many children at the moment.
Religious events, they mean different things to the different countries around the world. So for the moment, I'm just going to speak for what happens here in Ireland. At the moment, we're at a time where one of the religious events that's tied into school for those that attend a Catholic school would be a thing called their Holy Communion. And so that's actually 2 images that we had permission to share. And in the first image there, you can see a little boy who yesterday, he should have been making his communion. That's a time where families come together and celebrate this particular coming of age within their religious belief system. Equally, the little girl here, she was bought some cupcakes and to celebrate whilst in quarantine, more or less, or in isolation, because it was equally her Holy Communion as well. But in both of these cases, their older generation grandparents were not able to come visit and see. So these were things that some of the gifts were dropped at a safe distance, in particular the cakes and the buns. But in the case of the little boy here on the left hand side, his grandparents would live far away. So they would not be able to travel because of the 5-kilometer distance that we have at the moment. But he's still got a pretty nice smile, as is she with her cakes at the moment. But yeah, when it comes to a religious aspect, the other one that we could think of is the fact that you've got weddings that have had to be cancelled, quite a number of them, or christenings. And these are all times that we tend to come together as families to celebrate. And we have different roles within that.
So when we think about invisible loss, we think about different types of loss. These might be the losses that children can't readily describe. For example, contaminants. Children may be fearful that they themselves are the contaminant. So much has been spread on the media about how children can infect others but can't themselves become ill. So therefore, children become worried that they may infect relatives or even harm them or be an instrumental cause of their illness or even death.
Having sleepovers, it sounds so simple really, doesn't it? But in many ways, you know, a lot of young people enjoy those pieces. They enjoy, you know, having a friend over, a special friend over to stay maybe in theirs, or to go to their friend's home. But equally, they enjoy having sleepovers at family, to be with their cousins or their grandparents. And these are things that, you know, at times with the busyness of life at home, because even though many of us are at home now, home has become quite busy, as I mentioned earlier, with lots of schoolwork still happening. And, you know, so it's very hard to bring up the fact that I'm missing, you know, having my sleepovers, or I'm missing a particular friend or a grandparent in particular.
Spending time with family members of all ages, this can be both a visible and an invisible loss. Again, not being able to see or connect to those we love.
Loss of daily routine. Children and young people thrive on routine, as do most adults in many ways. We like to have a purpose and so on. But for many children, school or preschool is one of the places that gives them routine. They know it's structured. They know the way the day goes. And that tends to, for the most part, help them to feel pretty safe and secure. So at the moment, some families are trying to maintain some semblance of a routine with schoolwork and so on, but they're equally, as I mentioned earlier, trying to juggle maybe working from home. So it's a bit of a challenge to maintain the routine that was there. So we've put that down as an invisible loss.
Loss of primary caregiver. How do children respond when suddenly mother or father or the caregiver becomes the teacher? How does that impact the relationship, the attunement that they had? How does it affect attachment? So for a lot of children, they don't quite know how to articulate the fact that they're feeling frustrated. They're struggling with the fact that their mother or their father is suddenly also their teacher, especially where you have parents, for example, who may also be working on the front line, or may have to stay overnight because suddenly their work means that they are far more committed to caring for those on the front line of the COVID-19 fight.
Not allowed to go food shopping. I know, again, on the scale of things, it doesn't seem like such a big thing, but for lots of young people, that is part of their weekly routine. to go food shopping with their primary carer. They like to gather some bits and pieces. It ties into the one that we mentioned at the beginning, which was the contaminants. And it really reinforces that negative belief system for them that they are contaminants, because they're now not allowed to go shopping, or they're not allowed into the shops. So we've put that down as a definite invisible loss for children. And also their parents and caregivers. Yeah.
And I also think sometimes when the loss is perhaps less obviously traumatic, it's harder for a child to acknowledge how painful it is for them. So
yeah.
Trite to you and I may actually be huge, and the child may feel ashamed of acknowledging that it's an invisible loss.
Yeah. And I just want to add in there, just before we flick off that, Susan, if it's okay, that one of the difficulties that single parent families have found is how to go shopping when their children are being classed as, one person they're not allowed in. So it's very challenging for families.
So one of the things that we thought about was how best to convey both visible and invisible losses. And we thought this probably was the best way we could think of to explain it.
Once upon a time, there were 3 children. It was the time of the coronavirus, and the children were worried about different things. Sophie is 11. She's going up to high school soon. She enjoys arts and craft. She's missing her friends, but she's enjoying doing more arts and crafts at home.
So one of the things that you could be forgiven about thinking is that this doesn't relate. But actually it relates incredibly importantly, because the invisible and the visible losses that children experience are exactly what we need to identify in order to help them to future-proof, in order to create future templates, in order to treat anticipatory anxiety, in order to treat trauma. But we may so easily, if we only acknowledge the visible traumas and the visible wounds, we may so easily be getting the wrong target for the child. So I want to ask our studio audience what you think Sophie's visible worries and anxieties may be. We're happy with chatbot. We're happy for you to unmute yourselves.
So what is the question, Susan? I love this. The doodling is beautiful.
Thank you. What we want to know is, what do you think Sophie's visible worries might be? The ones that she may tell us about in therapy, the invisible ones, the ones that she may feel too ashamed to share. And these are often the ones which are the core of the problem, the ones where the heart is in the most anguish. So she's mentioned she's missing her friends. What else visibly could she be worrying about?
I'm just thinking about, and I don't even know that some kids even cognitively know it, is missing a parent that is present because of having to play so many roles, right?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So why don't we find out?
Once upon a time.
Oops.
Love the curtains.
And invisible loss may not be so easy to spot.
I'm worried I won't be able to keep up in school when school goes back.
So the invisible worry may seem too shameful when people are dying to acknowledge, but it might be the worry that keeps her up every night.
John is 9. He swims competitively in a swim team and enjoys football. Since the coronavirus, his parents are arguing more because they're worried about money. John doesn't like the shouting. He's missing his best friend from school.
So again, what might John's visible worries be?
I think that the invisible worry could be the shame and being afraid of what could happen at home. That if you were to go to place to play football again, maybe something would happen to mom and dad, and it's a shame to talk about that in school.
Absolutely.
Very good.
And can his parents still afford swimming and playing football and being in a team?
Yeah, that's a good point too, Danielle. Thank you.
So the financial loss of the family. Absolutely. Should we find out? So again, some children may have more than one invisible worry, and it's worth noting.
I'm worried that my parents will end up getting a divorce because of Corona.
That might be very shameful and difficult for John to acknowledge. It might feel as if he says it, it could come true. But what if he has another invisible worry as well?
I'm worried because swimming pools are closed. I won't be able to be an Olympic swimmer anymore.
Ironically, we have come across children where their biggest fear, and they feel shame about acknowledging this, is that the career trajectory they felt they were on is completely over.
Harry is 7. Harry's mother is a doctor at the local hospital. She's been working long shifts recently, and Harry has been seeing less of her. Harry hasn't seen Grandma in 7 weeks. Harry worries that Grandma is okay.
So when we think about this, what might Harry's invisible worries be? What might the visible worry be, or worries?
That his grandmother will die, or that his mother will get sick as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. The problem with invisible worries is they're the worry that we're afraid that if we say them, they might just come true. I remember somebody teaching OCD once, and this great name in OCD asked all of us to write down on a piece of paper somebody we loved, and then to put next to it, I hope they will die. And this is a room of experienced clinicians. I don't think any of us could do it, even though we knew it was illogical, because underneath all of it was still this invisible fear for every single one of us, hardened, therapists with many years under our belts. We knew it was illogical, but we still had this irrational fear. What if we wrote it and then it came true? So these are the worries that children are not always going to tell us when they come to see us. And these are the worries we need to know, because treating the obvious worries won't make the heartache go away, and it won't make the worry and anxiety and the sleeplessness ease. I really wish I'd have done faster opening curtains. So let's see what Harry's thinking.
I'm worried that my mummy will get the coronavirus and die.
And we're seeing this an awful lot with frontline workers.
So some of our loss and grief may be invisible to others, as we mentioned earlier, such as school. And these are some of the things that the young people that we interviewed really identified. You've got sport, you've got their peers, football, and obviously the older generation. So these seem to be the most strong losses that were named by the young people that we met. This is an interview of a young person here in Ireland. She's actually a child actress, so she's responding to questions with permission for us, and so we'll have a little listen and then we'll ask you some questions, if that's okay.
So what do you think will happen this school year, and does it bother you?
School won't be back until I'm in 4th class. Yes, it does bother me because I miss my friends and I miss being in school. And I will miss my teacher and my friends a lot.
Okay, so when you say you'll miss your teacher and your friends, is it that because the schools here in this country are not going back until September, maybe at the earliest.
Yeah.
So when you go back, you'll be going into a different class and you'll have a different teacher.
Yeah.
And so you'll miss the teacher that you've had this year because you didn't really get to go in and say goodbye or do the closing piece that we normally do.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So what do you think the invisible worries might be?
Any thoughts?
Well, you know, I was thinking about how the relationships may change, right? Forgotten by my friends. I'm not going to exist for them, right? How would that change the relationship? Would that impact my grades and my school performance? I don't know. That's what's coming up for me.
Yeah, it's a good question, a good response. Well, one of them was that she misses her grandparents. These are her visible losses. So if we watch the entire interview, she had actually named that she really misses them hugely, which obviously you weren't witness to at all. Anybody else have anything? Oh, hold on, it's coming up. Her stage and drama, because she is very involved in stage and drama. As I mentioned, she's been, in some different roles. So this is a huge part of her life. Now, they have been able to do some of this by Zoom. So again, in the interview, she was able to tell me that Zoom works really well, and she was able to describe what we see, but with many more children who are actually now actively doing some of these exercises from home via Zoom, which is good. But it was definitely one of the visible losses for her as we were talking. She's missing definitely the time in school, and it's this particular time. So I suppose that's the thing, just like you were saying, Anna, it's the fact that this is her year that she's never going to get a chance to repeat, and it's ended, so abruptly for her. And, when she does go back, it's going to be into a different class with a different teacher and possibly even different friends. For a lot of young people who are transitioning from primary to high school or secondary school, that can feel hugely overwhelming for them. So, and then we have one more. Misses the family pets. And this was important because these were pets within her grandparents. Her grandmother and her great-grandmother both have pets that she loved. And so she was really missing them as well. So that was one thing. But then we were wondering what you might think her invisible loss might be from her interview.
I'm muted. I don't know if this will apply, but one thing that I'm seeing in a lot of the kiddos I work with is that they don't express the fear that what if I am the one that brings the virus into the family? And now I have to carry a huge burden, right? Because if something happens to grandma, it's my fault.
Yeah, that's so true. That's a really good one. What for her, the invisible loss was having an ending. And I suppose when we look at the cycle of grief and loss, for many of us, if we lose somebody through death, and that's been problematic here as well. I don't know for many of you in the other countries, but there's no real ending. People can't come and celebrate somebody's life. But for Hannah in particular, it's an ending of this school year. So that was the invisible loss for her. But it just tied into me, in our mind, to myself and Susan, about Kubler-Ross's stages of grief and loss. And, we just thought that it really epitomized how important those stages are to us at this point when it comes to looking at the losses that humans are experiencing.
It could be interesting, especially for children who are in this transition phase between different cycles. The end of school, the end of high school, end of we have the BA degrees, the big graduation parties and all that. This is very different,
Yeah, so it's a massive loss, isn't it, in many ways for young people, and for as you said, for adults who've worked really hard to graduate from university. It's tricky, it's a difficult time. Thank you, Michelle. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
You know, it just brought up a thought or more of an association in our country.
Yeah.
When they come to the age of 12 or 13, they have a traditional ceremony of coming into adulthood. Mm-hmm. And this is a big family gathering, and it's you don't have to be religious or orthodox in order to go through this. Everybody goes, and it's only once in a lifetime, and there is a particular time and age.
Yeah,
you can have it, and if you didn't have that ceremony, it will never be there. So a lot of the teenagers I see, which are at this transitional point, they feel as if they've lost their coming in adulthood ceremony.
Yeah. And they actually have, in a way, because it's not going to be the same when it is if they do it after this event.
It'll never be 12. For girls, it's 12. For boys, 13. So then there'll never be 12 or 13 again.
Yeah. And you know, if we look at it across the lifespan, there are people who are missing significant birthdays. Like it could be becoming a teenager, or you know, a particular life event. 21, being you know, 30, 50 and upwards. There are many people who are missing these times, you know, so it is definitely a lot of loss.
What I like to thank you for is that mostly we do relate to the visible losses, and parents minimize the invisible one, and they're all covered with shame. You cannot, it's not just the fear that if I will articulate my thoughts, then they would, or the omnipotence of kids. Because, you know, I met a child who told me, you know, the whole coronavirus, it was my fault. I was bad. So it's a punishment, okay? But it's not just because of this. It's because considering deaths and economical changes and a lot of the financial issues, what is a transitional ceremony? What is it? It's not such a big deal.
No.
But for these kids, it's a huge deal. It's a big thing, and I think it's very important to just mention it and make us realize that we need to look for the invisible, not just for what we think that is difficult or hard.
Thank you, Esty.
And I think a lot of the adolescents or children are afraid that they lose their friends because it's so important to stay in contact, and they don't know what's happening in between the other groups, and they are not aware of what's happening, and not everybody is using WhatsApp or Facebook and all this stuff.
It's true, and some of them are too young for that, you know. What we did notice, though, from some of the surveys and the research, the little bit of research that we've done, is that, you know, in some cases they're setting up kind of Zoom play dates, you know, and some of the, which is great. I mean, it's similar to us, you know, in ways. So it's helping some connection. But then again, not every home has access to the internet. Not every home has access to the necessary screens, or will part with them for the children. You know, so that's another piece, isn't it, for us all?
Right. And we just realized that there is a lot of technical gap, and some of the children live in deprived surroundings where technology may not be there for them in order to connect to the world, to outside, and to their friends.
True.
And,
So then we looked at the emotions that this brings up, you know, with the loss or the loss, and we looked at, you know, the regular ones: sadness, anger, and, you know, parents might notice that the young person's become quite withdrawn or quiet, low mood, fearful. And it could also be the tsunami of many, many feelings all at once. And then we have this epiphany of the key. I'm going to let Susan, my colleague, come back in here and talk about our key. Go for it, Susan.
We suddenly made the connection that the emotions are the key to whether the loss is a visible loss that can be spoken about, or an invisible loss cloaked in shame. And that if we can find the key to unlocking the invisible loss, we can find the answer to helping children recover from the anxieties and worries around this time.
Yeah, and hit the correct target to work with. Yeah.
So you might be wondering how our story about children ends.
All the children had helpers to help them with their sad, mad, or bad feelings. Sophie stopped worrying about keeping up at school.
Everyone is going to have to catch up and teachers will help us.
John's helper told his parents how worried he was about them arguing all the time.
My parents are working really hard not to argue now. I will go back to swimming when the pools reopen.
Harry's mummy explained that she was getting tested for the virus and using protective equipment to keep safe.
Now I know that my mummy is keeping herself safe from the virus. I'm proud of her. She's helping lots of people.
Over time, all of the children's worries started to fade away, and finally, the world was filled with colour once again.
And we might also, by the way, Anna, I don't know if you're there, but the sunflowers are for you. And they're in colour. So we might also be wondering about Hannah and how Hannah did. And Hannah had a very, very good helper, an EMDR helper called Linda, who was incredibly good and nurturing and kind, and actually taught Hannah EMDR to help her recover from what her invisible loss was. One of the things that we thought when we were actually putting this together was about our transitions. And if anybody noticed, our transitions are a little like a kite, because it reminds us that loss, whether it's visible or invisible, is a bit like the wind. It's transient and ever-changing. But if we find a way of surviving the storm, and we find a way of being in the wind and a part of the wind, it's far less painful. So we'd love to thank you for listening and for being our fantastic studio audience. And was there anything else that you wanted to say, Linda?
No, just thank you very much for listening and also for joining in and participating. It was really appreciated, so thank you very much. And if you've any questions or anything you'd like to ask at this point.
I just have to say this is so beautiful. And I love the curtains though.
Oh, but did you like the sunflowers?
Yeah, I like flower, yes.
Just noticed the little Sophie was also painting a sunflower. There's sunflowers dotted throughout.
I really like also what Esty said in terms of you are helping us to not only listen to the explicit worries, but also to be aware of the implicit worries, about the worry that the children are not going to say with words, but are going to show with their behavior, with their act.
Mm-hmm. They act how they feel. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Michelle.
What a great point, because some of these worries, as you said, they're implicit, below awareness. Sometimes it's not like they cognitively understand them, right? It's not like I know the worry and I'm not expressing it, but they feel it, like is embodied, but not explicitly expressed, because there's not that cognitive understanding of it. So very, very powerful, this presentation.
Susan, you know, as an EMDR therapist, I may not be so worried if they don't articulate or express their invisible words. I think that through processing and connecting to the emotion, it will come up anyway. And I think this is the advantage of just letting the flow of the association, the emotion just come up. And if it's there, we'll see it in the processing itself.
And that's exactly why we put the key next to emotion, because we thought it's the emotion that unlocks the meaning behind what the child feels. So they may never be able to articulate it, but knowing that it may not be the obvious visible worry,
Right.
So when we have children who say, I'm angry, and you think, but they say they're feeling it in their heart and this doesn't feel like anger, it makes us aware that there could be something just below the surface.
Right.
An explicit worry or fear or a pain somewhere that they feel emotionally that they can't find the words to describe. And that's exactly why we thought the emotions are the key to unlocking the answer for the child.
And I think the invisible things are much more difficult for the children who are not already in our offices, children who are still at home, because it takes a lot of time that they get in contact with us or show their invisible wounds.
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are no more questions,
I have a question. So how do you, what do you want the EMDR therapist listening to your presentation? Besides emotion, how can we support these children in being able to access this visible and invisible losses, but also how can they work through it?
I think, well, I'm just going to start, and Susan, you can feel free then to jump in. I think one of the key aspects for any young person attending, be it for EMDR or other therapy, is the formulation of the relationship and the connection with the clinician, so that they can feel safe and trust, that there's a safe place for them to process and be, but that they feel valued and heard, which we know is important. And I think out of that, obviously, depending on the age of the young person, predominantly we're going to use a lot of play activities to help them to express their inner world and put it into concrete form. And in some cases, they may put some of that together with a narrative, depending. But I don't know, Susan, do you want to add more to that about how we would carry on?
I think it ties into everything that's already been said as part of this particular group presentation. Michelle started talking about the system, and when we think about it, John's EMDR helper or helper told the parents how John was feeling, which helped the parents to realize that their arguing was having a direct impact on John. When we think about it, the system is a part of what's going on. The emotional worry that the child can't articulate is part of what comes out in the body, exactly what Daniela spoke about. So we can see the direct connection to the physiological sense. When we think about Esti's wonderful presentation, we think about children who are very sensitive, who feel everything. They may easily become overwhelmed with something that parents may minimize or not realize the impact of. So I think it builds upon everything. Of course, your amazing presentation, what I'd say to any EMDR helper or therapist is watch Anna Gomez, because just looking at the fragmentation that occurs through invisible wounding, whatever the wound is, it's often the wound that can never be expressed. In COVID-19, we're seeing wounds that may be invisible through shame and through a fear of upsetting parents or fear of upsetting the system. We're not seeing the type of wound which can't be articulated for other reasons, but there may be invisible wounds going on which are far more incestuous. For example, children who may be being abused at home and can't tell, particularly if they're in lockdown. It's still an invisible worry. It's still an invisible fear. So paying attention to disintegration, which may happen as a cause of the inability to articulate whatever the wound is. So I think what both Linda and I would hope to bring is awareness, that formulation is the key, that understanding emotions and being guided by the child and not just listening with our ears, but listening with our hearts to what the child can't tell us. If there are no more questions, it gives me absolute great delight, both Linda and I. Thank you so much for your time. We genuinely appreciate it, and for your expertise. I love the fact that both Linda and I love the fact that we are a team here. And it gives us great delight, both Linda and I, to have the great pleasure of introducing Daria Oldenay, who is a very valued member of our team, who always has the most beautiful smile and has such a full heart. She shares willingly and openly at all points. Daria is an EMDR Europe accredited therapist and facilitator. She's also a CBT therapist, a play therapist, and a theraplay therapist. She has a master's degree in developmental psychology and continues her doctoral studies in this field. Daria specializes in complex trauma and detachment wounds in children and adolescents and organizes workshops on these topics. So over to you, Daria.
Susan, thank you so much for your kind words. And also thank you very much for this wonderful presentation with Linda. And now after your visible and invisible losses, we will take a look at what is there with my presentation. All right. When we enter the world of COVID-19, sometimes we can see that what we know is actually not there. And sometimes there are things that continue to be there, but we realize that they no longer work. Today, I will look at what is there with my presentation. In relational context, I will talk about 3 different types of loss. The first one is the loss of resources. Our clients need resources in the face of challenging events. Sometimes we help them access their own resources directly, and sometimes they get the powers they need from relational resources, even sometimes from symbolic resources. Creating resources is something we do during the preparation phase. In this title, I will talk about a loss related to the resources that are created in the session. However, during the pandemic, they lost their function. Our second title will be about new things gained during the pandemic period. I know new things are a gain and even a resource. But here I wrote loss of hope because in this title I will explain how new earnings turn into a sudden loss. And I do not think of a more appropriate expression for this. Yes, loss of hope. And in the last title, I will talk about some older losses, but these old losses are the ones that noticed because of the pandemic periods. And I will tell you about the loss of trust that these old losses have brought. So, first of all, I want to talk about a child who lost his resources because of the pandemic. And I will talk about what we did for him to cope. I will call him Ali. Ali is 8 years old and pretty smart boy. We have been working for a while. He could easily access many resources during our studies. And Iron Man was one of his symbolic resources. It was fun for Ali to get some powers for him. He did this quite easily as well. Iron Man, who is also a favorite member of the helpers team. And at the beginning of the pandemic, quarantine was rapidly put into practice in my country. We had a session with Ali on the 8th day of this quarantine. He looked pretty worried and upset. I thought, like many other kids, this was related to other losses. But he told me that my parents say that experts are working to get rid of this virus. They didn't know when it was going to end, and experts are trying to find it. When his parents told him that experts are researching, he remembered of Iron Man. When he said this, I thought, okay, great. I have a client who have resources. He has Iron Man in his team. After all, Iron Man can solve every problem. Avengers saved the world many times. I know because I am an Avengers fan too. And over, I have seen what they are capable of. But Ali is one of the titles of this presentation. And of course, it wasn't like that with him. And when he was told that the experts are solving this issue, he thought about Iron Man. He said to me, even Iron Man cannot save the world from such a disaster. This is a brand new disaster. Come on. They even beat the aliens. And you think that this is a brand new disaster? Okay. Of course, I tried to remind him of this. But he told me, I already told you, that it's a new disaster. Nobody has been able to deal with such a disaster before. It is not certain whether the experts can find solutions. There is no solution other than waiting for it to pass. And it is not clear whether it will pass or not. Maybe he heard about it from adults. I don't know. I didn't ask because at this point he was sure of uncertainty. Yes, this was a brand new disaster. Things that worked in the past would not work for a brand new disaster. This disaster was challenging and crazy, even crazier than aliens. Even Iron Man wouldn't work in this case. A brand new one was required. When I asked, tell who helps you deal with such a brand new disaster, he said, I don't know. This point, in front of me, there was a boy who had lost one of his best resources and saying that it wouldn't work any longer. Of course, my child therapist mind couldn't find a brand new and better inspirational resource than Iron Man, but someone from the ancient history came to my mind. Someone who had a brand new disaster during his time, someone who could take precaution and be patient, making sure that the disaster would pass. Of course, Noah. And I asked him, is he ever heard what a virus is before? He said, yes. And then I asked, well, have you ever heard of flood before? As you can see, it was a brand new thing for him. And he was really interested with it. I told him the legend of Noah. Of course, I changed the legend a little bit. For example, I did not mention about the other people in the world. Although the story was ancient, it was a new story for him. Stories are always inspiring. I can tell you that listening to this story was very helpful for him in many different aspects. He was able to create new things with limited things during this pandemic. For example, Ashura. Do you know what Ashura is? It's a brand new dessert made by Noah. He used different ingredients in his hands when the foods are not enough. Yes, like this, we did the following exercises on the story of Noah. At first, he painted a ship for himself. He took the resources he would need during his stay on the ship, and of course, Iron Man was there too. He prepared a team He put things he loved, like food, games, online events with friends. But he said that it was not possible to move too much on the ship. First, we made the ship bigger, but then he said he still couldn't stay strong enough. Then we thought that he could have a trip with a small boat using paddles every day. Even we found a game about it that he can play with his parents. Together they started to play this game every day until the day comes when the water will be drowned. With this, they had a nice physical exercise. Now he can get stronger. And at this point, many goals and needs appeared, such as being bored, arguing because they were bored in the same ship, not having a place to play the ball. Here, his answer was being safe. Okay. In response to this question, there were a few fears about the future, and we took them as targets. But also great things came out. Hopes, dreams. Yes, this was one of the points that he enjoyed most. He talked about making his own ashura. He made a soccer ball made of cloth and sponge, which was his non-edible ashura. And he made a new dessert experiment with his parents that included really different ingredients. Okay. In these parts, he did not say anything about what is happening in the world other than the usage of masks. At this point, we were able to share measures such as paying attention to social distance and hygiene. But he talked about many differences about himself during the exercise. He was stronger, he was taller, he made many new inventions. And now he told me a story saying, my pandemic story. In this story, viruses were occurring everywhere around the world. But it was a heroic story with phrases like, I was brave, I was patient, I coped with something that no one has ever experienced before. Stories and was also good. It was good to sleep off that here. Okay. In Ali's example, there were changing world conditions in pandemic. For this situation, there were no examples of solutions previously pursued for him. This made the child's resource of trust and strength no longer functional. Of course, we can estimate what Ali related this situation with. But at this point, for children who are already fragile about their sense of security, I think resources that's becoming dysfunctional is a huge loss for them. Okay. I'm going to talk about losses that seem like a gain in this new part, and from the loss of trust that comes with it. Turkey still has a ban for children under the age of 20 to go outside, and many families are still struggling. Many experts make suggestions for the time spent at home with children. Of course, new routines are a gain for many families, as Michelle said. But um, now I'm going to talk about a 10-year-old client. Sorry, a 10-year-old who said to have a high anxiety in general meaning and over-attached and highly emotional with his parents. He was brought into therapy by his parents for his stagnation and being unhappy during breakfast. The parents mentioned that during the pandemic, they were able to have breakfast better than ever before. They explained that they had plenty of time for this, and in this case, they said that they could not make sense of their children's comforts. Currently, uh, in, instead of going to school, students are getting their lessons online in my country. Also, many parents are working online. Normally, normally traffic is great most of time for people who live in Istanbul. No, traffic is no longer a problem for this family. Therefore, even they still work online, or the child still talk online classes. They still have a great breakfast time because there is no traffic. Um, we start working online with him and his parents. As I said, uh, normally his parents go to work. They have to leave home very early in the morning, and they would leave him would leave him to school while the child is half sleepy. During those days, breakfast meant sandwich in a bag, but he never mentioned a problem about it until the pandemic. During one of the sessions, he told me something about what happened at the breakfast table. I never knew that breakfast was so good when it was done together, because he was not aware that he had such a needs. For these kids, um, doing and enjoying from things that he had never done before took him to loss and grief of not being able to do this in the past. Then I saw similar anger, past reproach, and unmet needs in my other clients as well, which emerged in the COVID period. This is about realizing what the parents has not done in the past, and this creates a situation that leads to interrogate the things that are done in the past. Of course, this is a loss of trust. Even some children have been affected by this situation, even worse, and have returned to past losses. They got triggered, and the conflict grew bigger in families. For example, there were parents trying to establish ties that they did not have with their child, but this was something new. The children fled from the parents. Time on social media has increased. Um, this was a huge triggering period for the old casualties. Yes. This loss of trust, both by pandemic, is something that is newly noticed for the child that I mentioned before. We were able to work with him more comfortably. But the other thing we clearly saw was that the staying home for so long made parents think of compensating. Uh, and for the child who many attachment wants in the past, this was very triggering and make all trust problems to come to surface. Okay. And finally, I will talk about the loss of hope. Loss of hope. There were parents who had been at home for 2 months. They are now slowly returning to work. This is difficult for families who have created wonderful routines during this pandemic time. I think of children because losing something is bad, yes, but losing something immediately after you just found it creates despair. At this point, I think that the loss of hope for the amount of time children can spend with their parents is a great loss. I think we will really need to pay attention to this. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It is my honor to be a part of this wonderful alliance. I am also grateful for all the wonderful presentation. I wish that after the pandemic, we will still support each other in building new normals as we support each other right now. Thank you.